Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a sort of late night version of Nights of Last Call. Late Nights of Last Call. I am joined by Keeper Extraordinaire, Ben. Ben, who of course you may remember from our horror episode. And of course, obviously, if you're a member of our Discord and Patreon community, Ben needs no introduction. But Ben, for people who may not know you from Night's Last Call, maybe give us a little bit of information specifically, about you and your relationship to this game, and one of the reasons why I asked you to, kind of be here tonight.
Yeah, so I would venture to say, I mean, it's impossible to say like this is the best game, or you always have your favorites, your top 2 or 3 faves. Call of Cthulhu has perennially been in my top 5. Never, it might jostle in that position, but it's always been a strong contender, possibly in the top 3. And I think personally for me, the way I enjoy interfacing with the game is I'm not a big house rule person. I'm not a big tinkerer of systems. I like playing them as they lie pretty much. And when a game allows you to do that, that's what really starts singing to me. Now, typically, I gravitate towards more heavier rule sets because of that. Generally, Call of Cthulhu seems to defy that. But I think it's just because it does what it does so well. It just personally resonates with me in terms of its theme and tone and stuff like that as well. I've been playing it for about 30 years, I'd say.
Right. I was going to say, so this game, you mentioned it's in your top 5, perennially, constantly cycling in and out. But the fact of the matter is, we've seen tons of data that have supported this from, Roll20 statistics and from sale data from Drive-Thru RPG and, the ICRP or whatever it's called, ICV, the independent retailer stores. Call of Cthulhu is been basically for the last 20, 30 years probably at times number 2, number 3, number 4, like most popular TTRPG. Everyone understands that after D&D you're kind of going off a cliff a little bit, but that number 2, number 3 spot, Call of Cthulhu has sort of risen again and again and again from the dead. I think even I know that quote, right? That which is not dead may lie, and even strange eons death may die, or something. So it is one of those games that has been around my entire gaming career, but I just never sort of resonated with the cosmic horror aspect of the game. And so that's kind of one of the reasons I've never really dived into it. We did get a super chat from Mr. Vin, who said, let me change this real quick here. There we go. The real party starts now. Nights after dark. He also is loving the punished Ben unshaven look. So that's a week of being out of the city, right?
Exactly. And working for a living.
I
would say, yeah, and that's something I think will come up as we're going kind of what is Lovecraftian horror versus cosmic horror, and does the game allow you to do both, or does it, how does it fit into all the horror genres? Where can you kind of pick where you want it to be? And then most importantly, the game is known for its lethality, whatever that means, right? It'll be interesting as we go through it, I'll highlight a little bit of differences how this game differs from Pulp Cthulhu, which also from Chaosium, you can use the same scenarios, campaigns, everything. It just changes some of those widgets and it drastically changes the feel as a result.
Got it. And I think that's something, and we've talked about this before on First Look streams before. I'm coming in here with some idea of what I'm getting myself into, but I don't know the specific mechanics. But I'm always looking in these moments, and this is just sort of more of an education for you at home, how to evaluate these games without, there's a million games out there. You need some way to evaluate them. We can't play them all. And for me, I always ask myself, what is this game presenting to me? What is this game trying to be? I personally find that games that are a little bit more niche tend to deliver better. I know, Ben, you agree with that concept. Jacks of all trade are rarely masters of anything, which isn't necessarily a bad thing if you're one of those groups or players or whatever who says, we don't want to learn. I don't want to buy 25 different systems. I just want one thing, and I want one thing only. Okay. That you want the pop music of of the RPG experience, which is fine. I think it's totally reasonable. Taylor Swift is making a lot of money right now as we speak.
philosophy carries over to the game itself when we start talking about building characters. Jacks of all trades, in my experience, don't really last long in this game. There is a sweet spot, which I'm sure will come up as we go through character builds.
Cool. We got a tip from Satir, who says, I can't usually tip. Can't usually tip. So this is him going out. He says, but this deserves a cheer. Let us dive into the Eldritch Tome. Is this Satir saying enough talk? Ben and Derik are going to get too philosophical. We also have a super chat from Vin again, who said, for me, I just love how well designed, smooth the systems are. The D100 resolution is also so wonderfully transparent to the player. And we'll get into that quickly, but that is sort of one of the key features that even I am very, very cognizant of. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get there, about how, some game systems are really cool, but it could be very difficult, especially with dice pools and stuff, to really know how likely you are to succeed at something. All right.
It's really interesting because it helps you in a lot of ways to role play better.
Interesting. Right.
You already know, your likelihood of being able to do something, or where your gestalt lies as your character. If you have a really high fast talk, you're going to play that character different than someone who has a really high intimidation, for example.
Right. It's not we'll get to it, but it's not like the standard D20 model where it's like, oh, you're really good at this thing. Okay. You are sort of the average. It's like, if you're good, you're good. All right, here we go. Call of Cthulhu, horror role-playing in the worlds of H.P. Lovecraft. Now, right off the kip, and this is something I told you, I said, I bought 2 books when I was at Gen Con. I bought the Keeper book, because that's the big scary one with the big, octopus guy on it. But I also bought this investigator handbook, thinking it was like the player's handbook. But it turns out, like, the rules of the game are actually in the Keeper rulebook. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Would you say then that if you have a group who is thinking of getting into Call of Cthulhu, that the players shouldn't be buying this book? Is it kind of like, does it spoil anything?
I think it harkens back to that very ultra trad style of the players get the investigator book that tells them how to make a character, and most importantly talks about experience packages, which we'll go into. But the Keepers book has stuff that really would kind of spoil the fun in many ways for players. That kind of gives a little too much into how the sausage is made. Unlike a system like a D20 system,
right,
where to master the system, you have to know the math. You have to know how it works. Whereas in COC, there's a lot of advice specifically for Keepers in how to run a game effectively that will kind of get spoiled if the players know which levers you're
and normally I would hate that, but again, this is about there's a certain element here of genre emulation, and I think part of the problem with D&D is, or at least, okay, my presumption is, knowledge is usually not something, well, it depends, but the unknown is usually a great horror and fear generator, right? We fear what we don't understand, right? And that's kind of the whole premise of this, right? These unknowable beings from a cosmic, beyond that we cannot possibly wrap our minds around, that are so alien and strange to us. So when you have knowledge, not just of the world, but of the system in a sense, it can kind of ruin it, right? Like the guy who's mathing out his gun skill so that he can just, blow away Shoggoths is not maybe what the game is really trying to be, right? Yeah. Shadram with a $20 tip says, ooh, a Call of Cthulhu one-shot. I want to see Bob and Derik in a haunted house. Yeah, Shadram bringing up a great point. We do have a tip goal and a super chat goal. Super chat is just to support First Looks and show your love for them and get some more of those onto the stream. And then, if we don't fill this goal, maybe we'll bring it up again in October. But if we can get our tip goal, maybe the Knights can start making some conversations and talks about doing some sort of Call of Cthulhu one shot. Seems very appropriate as we move into the fall. All right. Originally written by Sandy Peterson. This is the 7th edition of the game. It's been around since 1981, so a long time. I'm sure there's some wonderful dedications in here, but I'm going to skip most of this. We've got a beautiful forward here. Sandy Peterson. Yes, what's that?
Are you familiar with Sandy Peterson's?
I am not.
straight. Okay, so Sandy Peterson originally wrote some RuneQuest supplements, and that is how he kind of got onto the radar of the folks over at Chaosium. When he found out that they were making a Call of Cthulhu game, he reached out to Chaosium and said, "I am begging you, please let me be involved." And they said, "We already have a designer, thanks, but we'll take that Lovecraft monsters book you wanted to do for RuneQuest." And he's like, "Okay." Well, then they reached back to him a little while. I'm not sure what the gap in time was, but they said, "Hey, the writer, it's a nightmare situation with this guy who's writing it. He doesn't really love or understand what it's about. Would you be interested in giving it a crack?" He said, yes. They said, the only caveat is you have to use BRP as the engine, but we are thinking about really stripping it down from the RuneQuest. And then he said, okay, I could streamline it.
Okay.
And basically, the game has been unchanged in the last 40 years, virtually unchanged.
Well, that is something. So yeah. So, we always talk about new editions and whether or not it's a complete rewrite or not. And obviously, if you look at D&D, we've got 5 editions of D&D, 6 potentially, if you want to be specific about it. And very few are backwards compatible, truly. But that is pretty surprising. And I think you also noticed something too, which is this game system is also sort of you're kind of getting triple duty, because it's a gateway into what you call BRP, which is basic role playing. It's their system that sort of underlines or underpins a variety of games, not just Call of Cthulhu, but also games like RuneQuest and
Basic fantasy.
And in some senses, right, BRP was kind of the foundation of like Middle Earth role playing and some of those other types of games, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Iron Crown definitely took a lot of inspiration from the basic idea of this game.
Yep. All right. So we've got a table of contents here, and we've got chapter 1, an introduction, which we'll go over briefly, but I'm assuming this is sort of more of like what is a role-playing game? What do you need to play? Now, chapter 2 is all about Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos. And we'll briefly touch on this because, again, one of the things I always want to talk about is what is this game trying to tell me that it's about? And then how does the game give me tools? What are the mechanics of the game? How does it help me reinforce what the game is trying to be about? And then the third question is, how does the game resolve itself? If you manage to do the thing that you're supposed to be doing, how does the game reward you? But, my prejudice against Call of Cthulhu might be a little bit that, well, what rewards can be had when the slow track to death is inevitable? But, we could talk about that. So we're definitely going to dive into chapter 3, which is all about creating investigators. Chapter 4, skills. We'll go for that. Game system. Chapter 5 is going to be where I want to spend a lot of time talking about how the dice rolls. I like how short these chapters are, though. That's pretty nice. Like skills obviously has like some pages in it. Then we talk about combat, and we have got a system in the game for chases. I don't know if we'll get a chance to get to that, but I know you're a big fan of chases. Sanity, which I do want to talk about, and then we have some information for the game masters, which we'll probably mostly skip, not only because it's not necessarily necessary for the playing of the game, but preserve some mystery for people out there. I don't want to spoil anything.
Agreed. Yeah. Some random guy has a great comment. He says that COC is one of the best games out there to cause great anxiety. So much fun. And that's something we'll talk about as we go into it, because I know that's a concern of yours, but it's very cathartic. It's a cathartic game for sure.
Neil tipped $5 as well. Thank you, Neil. He says, I am in for a Halloween one shot. Well, thank you very much, Neil. That we could talk for hours about that, but it's this idea of what is the role of horror, right? And there's kind of like a pleasure through pain kind of idea there. Like it should make you uncomfortable, but not in like a bad way, I think is the idea. So chapter 1, introduction to Call of Cthulhu. We got some really weird, creepy, cool Call of Cthulhu art, and welcome to Call of Cthulhu. We've got, it's a game of secrets
right there.
What's that?
Sorry.
Yep.
Cut you off. That creature, before we move on, that is called a Dark Young.
Oh, okay.
And, they kind of look like trees, but they're not, and they're huge, and they're easy to mistake for trees, which makes them perfect thing to drop.
Perfect dark forest type material.
Any scenario, they could just be trees in front of someone's house, like here. The next thing you know, the tree's trying to eat you. It's great.
All right, so it's a game of secrets, mysteries, and horror. You play the role of a steadfast investigator. You will travel to strange and dangerous places. You will uncover foul plots, and you will stand against the terrors of the night. You will encounter sanity-blasting entities, monsters, and insane cultists. Within strange and forgotten tomes of lore, you will find secrets that man was not meant to know. You and your companions may very well decide the fate of the world. All right, well, that's a pretty bold way to start us off here. This is a horror-themed role-playing game based on the writings of H.P. Lovecraft, writing in the 1920s and 30s. The American Horror Story influenced multiple things, considered a cult figure in his own right, science fiction from gothic horror to nihilistic cosmic terror. Perfect material on which to base a role-playing game. And of course, his most famous invention has become known as the Cthulhu mythos, a series of stories sharing common plot elements. Overview of the game: we have a game master, a keeper, if you will, who's sort of a game moderator. And again, I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but I've got Ben with me here. So, it talks about, keeping you a moderator. His or her role is to run the game for the rest of the players. It's already sounding to me like the verbiage here is that the moderator, the keeper, is very much sort of that judge style of game master, right? Where you are just trying to be as sort of unbiased and, sort of interpretive, like you're just trying to be like, I am just going to make a ruling based off of like what is happening. And then we're going to go forward with it. Like, I don't want to have any sort of agenda in the game.
Very much. And you also, mercurial is the word I'm going to say, but it's not necessarily mercurial, but you'll see as we go in, the keeper's encouraged to have sometimes be lopsided on purpose to keep the kilter off a little bit and keep the players kind of guessing on what's going to happen. You might make a ruling and in the moment just completely change how the rule's going to work.
Got it. And obviously,
for the effect.
Right. And obviously concepts like balance probably aren't super important here in this game, but we'll kind of
very symmetrical.
Yes. Now this is already the keeper picks a story to run. These stories are known as scenarios, and you will find 2 at the back of the book. So, full stop. I know we're only on page 12. Would you say then that this game does not really support what we would traditionally call sandbox style play?
Yes and no.
Okay.
For example, the way that I run, I always use published scenario as the backbone, but I just let them run once they're there. If they get the plot, great. If they don't, that's fine too. And it helps just because unless you are a mystery writer, it's very difficult. And there are people that get paid in order to write these scenarios in a way that lets you do it. And the scenarios themselves too, for example, the intro scenarios that are here, to me, are very railroady. You're stuck in an enclosed space and things happen. It kind of just walks you through the mechanics. Whereas most of the other scenarios, I'd venture to say 90% of them are basically sandboxes.
Got it.
They tell you what's happened, what's led up to the point when play starts. You're given an opening situation. That's it. The rest is up to you as a keeper to kind of keep the pressure on the players and keep moving forward. There's nothing that says they have to do this and then that happens. There's no real order to the events. They might say this scenario is designed to take place over a week. On day 1, this will happen. On day 2, that happens. And that you can totally keep or shift and move as you want. There's a lot of freedom within that.
Got it. So it's obviously it's a scenario. In fact, one of the things I've often talked about when I talk about like sandbox style games is that like foreshadowing can be problematic when you're rolling randomly things off of like, for example, an Oracle table, because how am I supposed to, you know what I mean? Like, how was I, I just generated something right now. How was I supposed to go back an hour or 2 ago and hint at it and foreshadow it so that right now it's this big dramatic reveal? Kind of difficult to do. And that's one of those things that, especially in a mystery, I think are more important than others. So a lot of this is standard, role-playing, cooperation, you're working together, whether or not the investigators are cooperating, the players should be. So, right. Just a great role-playing advice in general. Investigators could be any type of person from devious brutes, but the players should be respectful and nice. There are no winners, there are no losers, our usual kind of type of role-playing stuff. And we have here your typical back and forth between, player and GM and written narrative. We have a little sidebar here. I like that this is just in a sidebar, not like its own thing. It's just never played a role-playing game before. I like this. It says, John, his partner, and 2 friends meet up on John's house at Friday around 7:00. That's literally what we do. We meet up at Smith's house on Fridays at 7:00. After catching up on the week's news and organizing drinks and snacks, they sit down and begin handing out. It's now 8:00. That is like the most accurate depiction of a 7:00 start time of a role-playing game I've ever seen. I love it. And
very accurate.
Yeah, this is great. This is like a realistic, sort of.
Oh, yeah. Even in our game, we play every Monday, and we know the unofficial start time is 8. The official start time for our game is 8:25. And I have a joke: if you're running late, every minute after 8:25, you lose 1 sand. Your character loses 1 sand.
I love it.
Yeah, it works. Everyone pretty much shows up on time, but those first 20 minutes is just
you gotta work into it. We got a $15 tip from Marvelous Mr. Mean, who says, COC and adjacent games got me back into tabletop role-playing games. Edge of Darkness was my first scenario. Ben is a great source of information and a big help with Call of Cthulhu. Thank you, Marvelous Mr. Mean. Love to have it. Well, that's why we have them here. All right, so more information. It looks like they have a pretty nice little description here of play, which I think is nice and important.
The one thing that's worth pointing out, if you're familiar with Chaosium's books, particularly with this game system, they typically have one character's journey.
Got it.
First, go from the meta, the player making the character, they're playing the game, and then as they continue to teach you new concepts, they'll keep going back. And I think to this case, the character Arnold, they'll keep going back until Arnold meets his untimely demise.
Got
later
it.
On in the
and they even say here how to use this book. One of the things, obviously we're here to talk about systems, but I read a lot of role-playing games. Ben, I know you do as well. And one of the things I can't help but notice is like good design decisions and things that just in general help with the game. And I like this, just, hey, these are the rules, sections, chapters 3 through 9, which is what we're going to really focus on. And if you're new to Call of Cthulhu, we recommend that you read this and then read this. And so it's kind of giving you some nice information about that. We need some dice, D100s. We also need a D4, a D6, a D8, and a D20, but no D12. Points off. I gotta shout out my love for the D12. Okay. So basic polyhedrals is what we're working on. Interestingly, no, it's the D10 that isn't a platonic solid. I was like, no, the D12 is. Straight up, they're like, you should read these books from H.P. Lovecraft.
It does help. I will say it does help if you have read, like the big 3 from Lovecraft.
What are the big 3? Just for
my personal opinion, it would be Call of Cthulhu.
Sure.
Beyond the Mountains of Madness.
Got it.
Case of Charles Dexter Ward.
Got it. Yep. Well, and they definitely have those there as well. So yeah, a keeper who reads at least half of the above works, mostly of which are novelettes, will be in good shape to run this game. And you know what? That is not only probably accurate, but also I like that they're just honest. Like, hey, look, you need some lore to be able to really run this game and do it justice.
You have to read words too, because his books are not easy to unpack.
Huge, massive tip from Boothby, dropping $105, filling up our tip goal, who says, Cthulhu relai wahagna hala fahanataha. Which I assume means get fucked nights.
In Relier, where Cthulhu sleeps.
Oh, okay.
After that, yeah.
I should have known you actually probably would know the translation to it. There we go. Is that his like home dimension or something?
It Relier is
all right. No spoilers, I guess.
No, this is not spoiler
okay.
at all. It's a place that exists on the planet Earth. But it's kind of a portal to a non-Euclidean space that's beneath the ocean in like the South Pacific somewhere.
Got it. All right. Well, Boothby, thank you, or should I say, not thank you. As the group will be looking forward to a Call of Cthulhu one shot here later this year. So that'll be pretty sweet. That'll be really awesome. We got some people, by the way, shouting out their love for Shadow over Innsmouth, horror at Red Hook. And Beowulf has a question. He says, does the COC books cover the Dreamlands at all? I don't even know what that means, but I'm sure Ben does.
Yes and no, but we are going to talk a little bit about the settings available. That's why we're going to go through Cthulhu Through the Ages, because that ties directly into the skills.
Got it.
As of now, there is only one source book. It's from 5th edition about the Dreamlands, and it's a fantastic book. You can run it with 7. You just have to do some miles conversions, but there's nothing wrong with the 5e.
Got it.
I use it constantly.
By the way, Bob is not very excited about this. Bob, who is not always the most good person that handles anxiety well. A little bit of trepidation there. Can't blame him. All right, we got D100s. We got an investigator sheet. Okay. Chapter 2 is about Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos. Now, I'm not going to go too deeply into this. Obviously, I think what this thing is trying to tell you, I think this is more important about, again, H.P. Lovecraft, was an author. I understand he didn't live that long. He, was a pretty prolific writer during the time he was alive. More than likely probably had all sorts of like fits of delirium, like the classic journey of the weird horror writer. Right. But I think what's important here, and what I'm getting a sense of as I go through this book, is how important they are trying to impress upon you the tone, the theme, the sort of background, like the reading list. It's not enough just to say like, hey, this is about one person's vision and, sort of life's work. And to just ignore that is folly, but also probably not going to be that effective. This game is trying to create for you and your, friends, your own version of an H.P. Lovecraft experience. And so learning about this person and learning about why he did what he did is, I think an important thing. And, obviously pages come expensive in a rule book, and to take chapter 2 of your rule book before you get to the rules to talk about who this man was, what this mythos was. And again, these are things that I take for granted just because I'm been so nerd adjacent that I understand, the futility, the nihilism of struggle in the face of these extra dimensional entities that are so beyond our ken that we don't even register to them as things. And how like horrifying that is to realize how insignificant you are. Like that's just part of the nerd kind of culture. But if you're coming to this game and you don't know that, and you're coming from D&D, like reading this has to be like a kick to the nuts.
Yeah, it's a lot to uncover. And when we get to a certain mechanic, I actually have a little bit of Peterson love that I'm going to quote. John Peterson actually has something adjacent to this.
Okay.
Talking about in the origins of D&D. But when we get to it, it's a fascinating bit, because as we know, F20 is built off of the paradigm, and thus many RPGs built off of the paradigm of constantly getting stronger. And here's a game that completely inverts that, and it takes a little bit to get used to.
Yes. By the way, my little chat thing is still catching up, but we got a tip from Anonymous. I don't know if they meant to be anonymous, but thank you. They said maybe have Ben GM if he wants, and have Derik play in the one shot. Well, we shall see. I don't want to speak for Ben. I know you got some some busy times here. I don't want to speak for you, but that would be pretty cool. So we got the Cthulhu mythos, and again, there's this idea of the sort of dark outer gods. I think I'm taking this for granted that most people here probably know that. But again, when I'm thinking about what is this game about, it is this idea of these people who basically are, exploring things that, man was not meant to know. Right. And I think that the idea of that is it doesn't really want to end well for you.
Yeah, I think that actually, if you don't mind, just going back to the top of the chapter, there's a little splash where
Okay.
it says introduction. It opens with a little quote from Call of Cthulhu that perfectly really encapsulates what the game is about too. Go up a little more, back a little more to the top of this chapter.
Of chapter 2?
Forward, chapter 1.
Oh, chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Welcome to
There's
Call.
like a splash page. Keep going, keep going. Oh, you just passed it. A little more. No, go up, go back just a smidge.
Which page is it, Ben?
I don't know. It's this one.
Oh, okay. Got it. Here we go. This one here.
Splash page.
Got it.
Yeah, but that opening where it says, the most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. That's the game in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Your ability to put the pieces together is what will keep you alive. When you are able to start piercing the conspiracy, so to speak, and putting the pieces together, that's when the game really starts taking off.
Sweet. And again, using the work of this person to tell you about the game, makes a total lot of sense. All right. There's that quote I was talking about. That is not dead, which can eternal lie. And with strange eons, even death may die, which is a great quote. All right.
Lovecraft. That's Lovecraft quoting someone else, but it's appropriate.
All right. Fair enough. And I see some people here in chat, and I think I saw a little sidebar about this, and I think it bears talking about, which is, H.P. Lovecraft was not necessarily the greatest guy in the world in terms of his personal beliefs and his political affiliations or anything of that thing of note. And most of his works, which this game is trying to emulate, also come from a time and a place where there were a lot of problems in society. In some cases, problems that we're still dealing with today. And I think that, the game seems to take an approach of sort of, rather than sort of whitewashing it, or just flat out ignoring it and not talking about it, it seems to sort of take the middle ground approach, which is the adult approach, and say, this is something that you and your group should discuss. This is something that you and your group should talk about. If rampant sexism in the 1920s isn't something that you and your group want to deal with, then you should definitely take that out of the game. We're not going to tell you you're playing Call of Cthulhu wrong if you don't do that. But be aware that there may be situations where the sort of problem of sexism is something that is sort of part of that time and that place.
Hi, Mike T. But I will say that many of the campaigns that go into more sensitive subject matters always have quite a bit of keeper advice on different ways you can handle it. And in some cases, maybe as a group, you do want to explore some of these things, but
sure,
I'll always make sure your group is cool with what you're about to dig into.
Right. Yeah, and, absolutely. And I think that's true for everything. I mean, we've seen numerous examples of this in the sort of RPG space, right? Where people, because they want to go for the shock value. So they try to like spring it on their unsuspecting players, something potentially triggering, horrific, graphic. And, I don't think that's necessarily triggers are not a new thing. It's just something that in the past we just completely, carpeted over. Now we just acknowledge that the fact that, this is supposed to be an activity that is fun. Let's be respectful of the fact that people do have traumas, and it may not be appropriate to do so. And so I like the adult approach to it, rather than saying, don't do these things, can't do these things. It says there are ways to broach this subject in a respectful and potentially even growth or educational manner.
Absolutely. And I know when there's something that's particularly gnarly going to come up, that I just recheck with everyone before the session. Like, guys, this is going to be pretty gnarly. How do we feel about exploring this? Or, where do we want the line to be? Where do we want the veil to be drawn? And almost always you will be using lines and veils a lot in this game.
Yeah, it goes without saying that in any game that, and again, I don't want to bring someone into this game. And the reason I say this, I've played horror RPGs before. I've enjoyed them in the form of Dread. And part of what I'm trying to do in Dread is I do want you to get a little uncomfortable, right? I do want you to feel a little at unease. I want you to feel a little squeamish, just a little bit, right? I want to push you a little bit, but not in a way that is damaging, right? But in a way that is potentially cathartic. And so that's kind of that. What I will say is probably a delicate balance. And I think it would be very easy to do this in a potentially, I don't know, damaging is the right term, but potentially harmful way.
Yeah, you have to tread softly. You have to know the group or know kind of what you're doing and know where where those boundaries are going to be always helps. I've run a lot of noobs through COC, and I almost always make it less about like the straight up horror type stuff and make it more about competing agendas a lot of times. That is just as much fun, watching the characters inadvertently turn on each other.
Right.
And it that in itself explores a fun part of the game without having to go, down an alleyway that, best left not gone down unless it's a group that you intimately know.
Right. 100%. Yeah, I mean, Love Fist with a $10 super chat says, who knows, your character might end up being tortured. Absolutely.
That's because character, that's what happened to him on Monday.
Okay, so he's speaking from experience.
Oh, yes.
Yes, but again, that's something that is a great example of lines and veils where you might say, no, this is nothing that I want to ever have happen in my game, ever. But you could say, I'm fine having it in my game. I just don't want to hear about it. Like, fade to black. Right. And that's totally acceptable as well. So I brought up the character sheet here really quick because I just want to take a look at it to get a sense before we dive into like the mechanics of creating a character. Because we're in chapter 3 now, which is the, creating a character. And specifically, it's creating your investigator. So again, there's pretty strong language here, which is telling you this is what you are. In fact, I often say like D&D messes this up. Certainly modern versions by saying like, make your character and they could be whoever you want them to be. And it's like, no, this is a heroic fantasy game about killing monsters and going on adventures. Like you should be making this. And this is trying to say that there's a different ways to make your investigator, but you're not creating a character. You're creating an investigator, and words have meaning. That's why we use them. And I just think that little things like that really stand out to me as being very directive. Mm-hmm. Okay, step 1, we generate characteristics. So we have 8 ability scores. Looks like strength, con, dex. I'm going to guess because I'm on the character sheet. Strength, constitution, dexterity, intelligence.
Intellect, but yeah.
Intellect, okay. Size? Seems like a strange attribute, but okay.
Very important. Very important.
Power.
Willpower, yep.
Willpower, okay. App. Edu is probably education. App. All
Correct.
right. I don't know app.
Appearance.
Appearance. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So we got some stuff here to look at. All right. Generating characteristics. We are rolling dice. No point buy here.
You can. There are several different ways to make characters in this game, one of which could be straight die rolls, and I have players that insist on doing dice. I have some that will use point buy, and I have some that will do I have a standard array. I say you can just grab this array, put them in any order that you like. At the end of the day with this game, it really doesn't matter which method you use as long as at the end you have a character that you like.
Got it. So we're rolling 3d6, which is it's funny how it feels so tied into like the it's D&D, you're rolling 3d6.
Yeah.
Even though it's percentage, it's just funny. And then you're multiplying by 5 to generate your characteristics. So on average, you're going to get a 10.5. So you're looking at 55 being, or roughly around that, or 52 or something like that.
Yep. That's about right.
As being your average. Okay. So that's something to note. So strength is our muscle power. Okay. Lift, tightly cling to something, damage. Okay. Constitution is our health and vigor, much as we think. If we go to 0 con, we do die. Speak of the devil, Ben, sort of a sidebar here about, low characteristics. Does that make you a bad investigator? It's basically saying that no, like it doesn't necessarily affect anything that you do. Now, interesting, size is different. Roll 2d6 plus, I want to know what this characteristic is. Size is it's your height and weight. That's so weird to me. I mean, nothing, in my mind, nothing to me is screaming more, this game is high simulation, than the fact that size is an ability score.
It's really funny because it's
weird.
On one
that is weird.
hand, very breezy and light, but in the other hand, this is kind of what we were talking about before. It's very simulationist. It's like, it's not the physics, it's like the metaphysics of the world. It embraces it so much that is very, very simulationist, this game, though. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, obviously having a size characteristic. I mean, contrast that with like medium, and it says here it's size and weight into a single number. Okay.
And it is important.
Okay. Dexterity is our agility, physical coordination. Makes sense. Appearance.
I would say that if anyone is going to min-max, Dex is almost always the one they're going to do that with.
Got it.
That's fine. You could crank that Dex up, Shane.
Marvelous Mr. Mean. Thank you. Hope you catch the rest of the stream later. You're going to be late for your game. That is the only acceptable reason to leave. So I'm totally excited with that. All right. And again, so, and real quickly, well, I'll finish up, but then, dexterity, we have appearance, which is your physical attractiveness and your personality. So a person with high appearance is charming and likable, but may lack conventional good looks. So it is kind of a charisma in, plus comeliness. It's kind of like an amalgamation, but they are saying that there is an element there of both personality and physical appearance.
Yeah. And it's up to the player to decide what that means.
Okay. Yeah.
The player says I have a high appearance, but that doesn't mean, I'm an Adonis. It could just mean I am a very good salesman.
Sean coming in with a $2 super chat says, even in Call of Cthulhu, Dex is still the god tier stat. Well, you know why it is? It's because no matter what game you're playing, 99%, if it's anything resembling a trad RPG, where dying is usually a problem, then being able to avoid attacks is usually a really good thing. And so dexterity is usually the dodge, the AC stat. And so it's always been, that level. And historically, even in D&D, PCs, a lot of times their advantage over these horrific monsters that they fight is ranged weapons, right? And I got to imagine that, most of these Cthulian horrors aren't walking around with, double-aught shotguns, right? But your investigator might. And so, again, your ability to handle a firearm or a longbow is definitely probably one of the few things that you have an advantage on, whether you're talking about old school first edition AD&D or you're talking about Call of Cthulhu.
Winchester is your friend in this game.
There you go. Awesome. I love it. And by the way, though, especially I love the idea, especially in that older sense. This is a quick tangent. Apologies, but it is horror related, but I just want to say how well this worked. Years ago, I went to a board game convention that was like a local board game convention in Ohio. Probably had less than 100 people or 90 people. They took over a Boy Scout camp for the entire extended weekend. And some people stayed nearby. Other people stayed in like the cabins nearby. And then the main lodge was sort of where everybody would gather and board game. But one of the things they would do every year is do a mega game. And this year they did a mega game, which was like zombie apocalypse. And the idea was that about half the people, or maybe about a third of the people who signed up, joined Team Zombie from the beginning, and everybody else was Team Human. And Team Human was divided into like 4 or 5 different groups, and they had to get together enough pieces to get the helicopter working so they could get off the island before like 4 p.m. Because that's when like the army was coming in to like nuke the island. And the thing that was awesome about it was, as a zombie, you had to walk. But humans had their Nerf guns. And this was like not the Nerf guns of my youth, which were kind of shitty. These are like the modern Nerf guns, which are insane. And if your zombie got hit with a Nerf gun, okay, you're done. And you had to go back to like the central zombie point and basically like cash in and reload. And it was completely unfair. But those bullets ran out. you know, and like as powerful as they were, the fact that they were like this, almost like this god tier weapon, but the fact that you might only have 10 shots for the whole game made it feel so good. Even though I was a zombie and getting blown away, you could see the growing horror on like a person's face. And I really loved the tension that generated, because at a certain point, you know, the first hour or so, people were just shooting us left and right. But then they started, maybe it's time for me to run, you know, or maybe it's time for me to whatever, because, you know, I'm running out. And by the way, the piece de resistance of this story is at the end of the day, maybe due to some potential rules issues that could have been dealt with better, the zombies never really had a chance, ever. But the humans all still totally lost. Why? Because they totally turned on each other. They did not work together, and they ended up killing each other, and nobody got off the island because they wouldn't trade critical information to the other team to give them, because they were like, you betrayed us, and we'll just sit here and die. And so everybody ended up dying anyways, but not from the zombies, because it turned out the greatest enemy was man, which I thought was awesome. All right, so intelligence. So interestingly, by the way, this one is also a 2d6 plus 6. So does this mean that your characters are on average smarter? Right, because 3d6 average is 10.5 and 2d6 plus 6 average is 13.
Yeah. So yeah, possibly. I haven't really noticed that much. Your intellect ties into your education.
Got it. Okay.
So,
but intelligence and education are both 2d6 plus 6, whereas everything else except for size is 3d6, which is kind of interesting to me.
I will say that in the game, which we'll get into, there is something called an idea roll.
Okay.
That is rolled against your intellect, intelligence. And more times than not, the players get it.
Got it.
So maybe it is higher than average, which is also good because they're supposed to be investigators.
Oh, they're supposed to be like kind of probably naturally precocious or whatever. Okay. They determine the number of personal interest skill points that you can allocate to a new investigator. Okay. Also as the value for both idea rolls and intelligence rolls. Power. Power indicates your force of will. Okay. The higher the POW, the higher the aptitude for and resistance to magic. Oh. Like you could be a spellcaster?
Yes.
Oh, I did not know that.
Every spell in this game has opposed power rolls, which we'll get into in the mechanics, because you have to remember this game, the DNA of it coming from RuneQuest, right? There's no initiative. This is opposed rolls all the time. So when it's on, everyone makes a roll.
Got it.
And you will be making a lot of power rolls in this game. a lot.
Got it.
And,
okay.
You are hoping you succeed.
By the way, in chat, Boothby says you can be a spellcaster, but you don't want to be a spellcaster. And some random guy says, "Don't cast spells; it's a trap." Okay. I'll take your word for it. I do note here, by the way, that power sanity points begin the game equal to your character's power, and I have a vague understanding that is something that is pretty important for you to have. Okay. And then education is our last stat. EDU is a measure of formal and factual education possessed by the investigator, as well as indicating the time that you've spent in full-time education. Again, it's stats like education, sort of lean me towards this idea that your character is maybe kind of more of an intellectual. Is that kind of a fair assessment?
You could be. I mean, remember the tropes that you're playing into are, I'm the professor of occult studies at Miskatonic University, or I'm an antiquarian, or I'm an antiques dealer. I'm a curator at a museum. And on the other hand, I've had rum runners, second story men, mob malls. I mean, it runs the gamut. Artists, bakers. I mean, it literally can run the gamut, but something in their background has made them curious. They've experienced something in the past, or they have a natural curiosity about something that kind of is the catnip that gets them in.
Got it.
But education influences the amount of points that you have to be able to attribute to your various skills.
Got it. Which Makes sense. That size trait still is tripping with me. All right. And yes, as Ben was saying here, education is a factor in determining how many occupational skill points you begin with and represents your starting percentage for the own language skill. Okay. Education is also used when making no rolls. So there's a no roll and an idea roll. Is that what you're telling me? Okay.
Yes.
Interesting.
And those are widgets for the keeper to be able to nudge if players get stuck. You can.
Okay.
You
Okay.
can
Okay. So interesting. Okay. So, we talk about modern games and we talk about like the perception check, right? To see something. We talk about like the idea of like roll a check to see if you have a great idea. So you're telling me that this game does support that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So
But
again,
it's not left up to the keeper.
sure.
It wouldn't be the player going, can I make an idea roll on this?
Got it. Okay. So this is something more that the keeper kind of triggers and your character, so it's kind of an emulationist quality, right? Because if your character has this really high statistic, they should be, maybe putting some connections together or doing some.
Yeah,
element to
exactly.
better.
For example, if you're a brilliant surgeon and you're putting together some piece of machinery, you might not have mechanical repair, but you might know how pipes work and to connect things in order to make some type of system that will do something.
Got it.
That would be a no roll right there.
Got it.
Or
So it's kind of a generic mechanic to kind of like cover a lot of bases, basically.
Mhm.
Okay, interesting. All right, luck. Another thing that I understand is important. When creating an investigator, roll 3d6 and multiply it by 5 for a luck score. See chapter 5 for how it is used. No other description. Everything else got a description. And I should point out, by the way, that luck as a stat is already very emulationist, right? Because there is no such thing as luck in real life, right? But there's this idea that these investigators have a little something extra, right? They're probably doomed anyways, but there's something special about them. They're a little bit too curious. They're a little bit too plucky. There's something that kind of separates them, even if they're an everyman. There's something that kind of distinguishes them from the crowd, and luck is definitely, I think, a great way of showcasing that. Wow, this game is very simulationist, though. Age, here we go. We pick an age, and then we have to deduct. If we're young, we have to deduct from strength and size and from education, of course. But we get to roll twice for our luck. Very nice. We can be older, which gives us more education, but then we start to lose strength, condex, and appearance. Have you ever had an 89-year-old man in one of your games?
No, but we have had a couple that were well into their 60s.
Okay.
In fact, Sal Volray on the Discord.
Yeah, Sal Volray. Yep.
So his character that he was playing was a doctor who had a limp. He was a pharmacist. He had a rough time. But his character is very knowledgeable. He did a lot of things amazingly well. In fact, his knowledge of chemical compounds came in super important during one part of Masks. Right, literally like 2 sessions before his character died. But he did the thing. They were much better off because of it, but then he didn't make it.
Got it. Well, I mean, at least you have your moment to shine before you go out. By the way, Vin said that luck is his favorite thing here and also the first thing I'd house rule. Damn you, Vin. You can't just accept something once. Vin is like the anti-Ben. Ben's like, I will not house rule if God help me. And Vin's like, I like the rule, but I'm still going to change it because, I just have to.
I will say that this game does a fantastic job in naturally selecting spotlights.
Got it.
If the keeper is kind of keeping things moving along, I find that the scenes in this game do tend to run longer than in other games. Like in a Powered By, a scene might be super, super fast.
Right.
It develops a lot slower and longer, but the spotlight is there, and it's really clever the way it works in play. If you go, you might have the team breaks up a lot of times, for example, but that's your chance to always have someone always has something to do. Generally speaking, they can always help the bottom line.
Got it. Okay. Then we have half and fifth characteristic values. Now, my knee-jerk reaction here is start kind of going, oh. All right.
Yeah, so it gets a little mathsy now.
You're going a little mathsy. Once the percentage values for your characteristic have been determined, the next step is to write in the half and fifth values. Okay, it's saying I do get a spot for them on my sheet. Oh, I see it now. Okay, so
Yes.
I have a full value, half value, and fifth. So basically, you could just do that on the fly, but they're saying, just figure it out in advance.
You really want to know those thresholds because those are your success thresholds.
Got it. Okay. When a characteristic value is referred to in the text, it means your full value, whereas half and fifth values are required. This will be clearly stated, normally called hard and extreme. Okay, so is that how the game models like difficulty?
Yes.
Got it. So if I have an 80 in, I don't know, strength or something, and I'm trying to lift, something up, you might say, yeah, okay, you have to roll. But if it's like me lifting up a car, you might say
I will say you need to make a hard success.
Hard success. So you just have to say that word, and now I know that it's half, or whatever written on my sheet, but I can do half of 80 is 40, and now I'm rolling at a 40% chance instead of an 80% chance. Wow, that is a big drop off. That's a big drop off in success.
Yep. The other thing, and this is where the tension comes in the game. Remember we talked about opposed rolls?
Yeah.
A lot of the rolls in this game isn't whether you succeed or not. It's your degree of success over the other person you're opposing.
Got it.
So if I'm a caster and I'm making a power roll to cast something on your character, let's say it like makes their brain boil, you not only have to succeed in your power roll, you have to beat my degree of success in a power roll. And a lot of the antagonists have incredibly high power. So I might have a power of 120, which means I hard succeed at 60, whereas you might hard succeed at 30.
Yeah.
So it automatically becomes harder, a lot more challenging.
Yeah, and Vin here with a $2 super chat says, and again, the transparency from the D100 is amazing. So I get what you're saying here, which is not only does this say, look, I mean, number one, I don't know what stats actually get to, but to be at a 60 or 70 or percent, it's like you could feel pretty confident that I'm going to be able to succeed a lot of the times. And I understand the game has pushing, and pushing usually means you get to re-roll. And so if I have, say, a 70% chance of succeeding and I fail and I push, then the odds that I'm going to fail a pushed roll at 70% success is like 11%. Like I will pass 91% or 92% of the time, which is really great. But it also shows me real quickly and easily in understandable math language, if you say something is really hard and you say this is rolling on hard or extreme, I can look at my chart and go, oh, that is a brutal reduction in my character's efficacy.
This game comes alive when you're getting into the devil's bargain part of it.
Sure.
That's
okay. All right.
Where the tension.
See, that surprises me that is okay. All right. We'll get into that. Oh, by the way, they say alternatively, you have an electronic sheet for your character if you don't want to do simple math like dividing by 5. All right. Other attributes, we get a damage bonus, and that is related to our character's strength and size. They give us a nice little table here. So we add those two numbers together, and that tells us how much extra damage we're doing. Is that what I'm reading this here as?
Yeah, it correlates on the table to what the actual bonus will be, but more importantly, it goes to your character's build.
Okay,
so it's nice to have a damage bonus. That's good. If I hit someone with a waffle iron, because the bad guy snuck into my apartment, and I wasn't expecting it. All I had to hand was a frying pan. That's great, but the build is where the rubber hits the road when it comes to the combat.
Got it. So build is used in fighting maneuvers. So in 3rd edition terms, this is like your combat maneuver bonus, right? Like if I'm trying to grapple somebody or not push someone over, this build, because it's not doing damage, but if I'm stronger or bigger or both, I'm going to probably get some sort of bonus. Is that how I'm reading this?
Yes and no. So it's more punitive than that. So basically, is in combat you have 3 options.
Okay.
You can fight back, and this is anyone can do this. It doesn't matter if my character is faster than yours. I say, all right, I get to act first. The NPC's coming to punch your character. You can go, well, I'm fighting back. That means you hit each other simultaneously. You both make attack rolls. If you could choose to dodge, and all you have to do is succeed in that dodge roll, and it doesn't matter if I succeed or not, you automatically get the dodge.
Got it.
Or you can choose a maneuver, which is anything else.
Got it.
And maneuvers is where the builds come in, because if someone's bigger than you, you have a much harder chance of knocking them over, squeezing past them, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. And it makes sense too, again, talking to the simulationism, it's based off of your strength and your size. Just like I noticed that your hit points is based off of your con and size. Hit points are used to track the cumulative damage inflicted upon an investigator, an NPC, or monster, and indicate how long they can stay in the action before collapsing from pain, exhaustion, and death. So HP is pretty much meat on the bone to a certain extent. It's not like luck and grit and pluck.
Oh no.
And
okay. If you lose getting them back is a long and arduous process.
Right. In fact, if I look at this character sheet here, I can see that there's a bunch of check boxes for different things like major wounds and unconscious and dying. So I'm sure there's something here. Movement rate, we're going deep here with the simulation. If you're in your 40s, you deduct 1 from your movement. I resent that remark. Probably true, but and again, this, I get you're doing this once, like when you make the character. So it's not like cumbersome, but it is kind of funny to me that, but I mean, if you're probably running away from shit a lot in this game. And so how fast you can move is probably important. But that being said, almost everything I've seen here has either been simulationist or emulationist. Like I have seen very little here that is what I would just call narrative, or even really particularly concerned with being a fun game. It is just like, no, we are trying to model this Lovecraftian reality as best as we can. So very, very high on that scale. All right. Step 2. So we've got our stats. We determine our occupation. Now I'm guessing this isn't like a class, or is it?
Yes, I would say so. Your occupation gives you a suite of skills and a certain amount of bonus points that then you can put into those skills.
Got it.
And education adds a little bit more to it. So you derive it from age, your occupation, and your education.
Got it. And we've got a nice little depiction here of the character sheet showing, again, in a very stepwise manner, how you determine your characteristics, you calculate your derived attributes, the ones that we were just talking about, your movement rate, which we were also just talking about, decide your occupation, which is, again, coming up here on page 40, which will kind of basically, if you're a doctor, you probably have medicine and stuff like that, right? Skills like that. I'm getting traveler vibes here, Ben. It says, choose an occupation and note the occupation skills and credit rating.
Oh yeah.
Does Cthulhu have mortgages? That's all I want to know.
Okay. So the money is very abstracted in this game.
Okay.
Because your credit rating is your standard of living, but it also can be used in this game. They have something what they call expanded skills in this game, which means that your credit rating is your standard of living, but you can expand that skill to mean other things. For example, let's say your character has a credit rating of 40.
Okay.
Means you're middle class. You might own a car. You probably might rent a house or something, but otherwise, you work for a living. And in the course of the investigation, you have to go undercover into a gentleman's club. Guess what? That credit rating of 40, there's no way they're going to let you in the door. Not because you don't make enough money. It's because your clothes.
Got it. It's your
hell, the cut, your watch, your shoes.
Right.
You have a credit rating at 80.
Right. You've got a Timex, not a Rolex, right?
Exactly. With the ascot, and you go, I have an appointment with so-and-so, and they're going to be like, we don't see you on the road. You can use that, then go, can I make a credit rating check and like bluff my way through? I would say absolutely go for it.
That's interesting. It's like someone, they go to Saks Fifth Avenue and they max out the credit card to try to up their suit game to get in. All right. Decide your skills and allocate your points. So we're going to get occupational skills. We're going to get personal interest skills, which is our intelligence times 2, and allocate the points to any skills. Now let's talk about these skills here. Oh, I like this. There's a table here. What do these numbers mean? Sort of a benchmark. And again, this gets back to what this gets back to what Vin was talking about, right? Like, what does an 18 strength really mean? You know what I mean? Or like an 18, like we know that 18 dex means you get +4 to your dexterity modifier or -4 to your AC modifier, depending on what division you're playing. But what does that really mean? How does that translate? And this is like a direct 1-to-1 correlation between whatever's written on your character sheet and something, a benchmark. And it really helps you. And also, by the way, it's terrifying, as someone who's not read this game, to read it and it goes above 100. Oh, okay.
Yeah, you'll never see it.
Yeah, right. Oh, monstrous strength. Oh, 200. Oh, okay, gross. It's very, very interesting. And then here is that introduction to that character that you were mentioning before, Ben. This sort of proto character and how they're describing them and how they're kind of creating them. So let's see here. Hold a second. We'll get to the skills section in a second.
I will say this, that when you are running, if you're running it for a campaign, once you kind of set, the way I like to do it is I'd much rather people roll, even for a one shot, roll the characters than use a pregen. And it creates great dialogue because they're like, okay, well, I'm thinking about doing this, or I'm thinking about doing that. And it really helps kind of seed in to the player. Like first you kind of come up with an idea, and in your mind, you might think about how old or smart they are, right? You might even jot those numbers down and then you might try rolling the dice and go, this isn't quite exactly what I wanted. Can I use an array or something like that instead? And most keepers, I know I would say, sure, go ahead. I mean, what do you talk to me? What are you trying to do?
Right.
And then we'll go through it. And I'm very, very picky when they give me a character back, and we kind of go back and forth a couple of times going through the numbers. For example, when it talks about personal interest, a surprising number of investigators are interested in firearms, fencing,
100%. Listen, I remember the first time we made Vampire the Masquerade characters, and it was like, oh yeah, my character has 5 dots in ranged combat and 5 dots in melee combat. It's like, I thought you were like, well, yeah, but at college, you see, I took up fencing. So it's a hobby of mine. 100%.
Yeah, so a little bit of back and forth.
Sure.
We get it right where in the sweet spot where I would like to see it be, but without, I'm not punishing the person for having ideas, but if you're an archaeologist and your firearm skill is 70, but your archaeology is 30.
I'm Indiana Jones, Ben. You're like, not my game. This is Pulp Cthulhu.
A better archaeologist than that.
Vin, by the way, once again, sort of shouting out the transparency of the D100, just the ability to sort of make that quick adjustment. So they give us a list here of sample occupations, but it does reference that is where this book, I guess, comes into the fore, which is that this has correct. More list of these occupations. And we can see some.
And it has another optional rule that most keepers allow called a skill package.
Got it.
Means that you're an experience package rather. So you're not just a police officer, you're a veteran police officer that's been on the force for years. You're not just you didn't just fight in World War I. You were like an expert code breaker in World War I.
Got it.
And it gives you additional skills. The other cool thing about this game is it's so malleable when it comes to that. Sometimes they go, none of this fits what I want. I go, great, let's find the give me your background. We'll grab an existing experience package. I just go take that out, put this in, take that,
swap in, swap out. Yeah. Because again, the balance isn't the part that really matters as much, right?
That is
like, there's always that truism, right? Like you can't beat the DM, right? Like I could always throw a great red dragon at you or whatever. But I mean, in this game, that is very, very much the case, right? Like the things that you're going to be facing, it doesn't, I don't need to try to win. Right, like it's going to happen.
There's
anyways.
No arms race.
Right, there's no arms race that you could probably win. Vin with a $2 shout out to Pulp Cthulhu. I want to talk about that a little bit when we get to like sort of talking about some of the worlds, but I do want to get through these character creations. So different occupations now, and then there's tables to for your background of building your ideology, people in your life, treasure possessions.
Now, these are very important. The ideology, beliefs, the significant people, and meaningful locations.
Now, are they meaningful in a mechanical way, or are they just meaningful? Okay.
In a mechanical way, it's great for your background story, but also the thing is, what this does really well is it gives the player mechanical fallbacks for when they start losing sand.
Okay.
And keeper threads to put hooks in and start pulling on.
Got it. Right.
Almost like a scarf that was knit. You knitted the scarf, and now the keeper goes in, undoes those end knots, starts pulling those threads out.
Right. I kind of forgot about the horror concept here for a moment. It's like you want to have things, right, that you can pull apart and you could pick apart, now putting my evil keeper hat back on, you suddenly see, what are your beliefs? And you're like, oh, let me completely fucking destroy those. Oh, who are the significant people who are the significant people? What are your treasured possessions? What locations are meaningful? Your wheels start to spin and you're like, oh, this is horrible. like this is horrifying, right?
You will use all of them.
And
bring every significant location, their treasured pocket watch that they got from their grandfather, who fought in the Great War, or perhaps even before the Great War, that was handed to his father. And it means everything to the character. You want that. I want that. I want to see it smashed. I want to see it stolen. I want to see what will happen when those things happen to the character.
Love Fist with a shout out, $5. Thank you. Says Heinrich's Call of Cthulhu Guide to Character Creation is really good as well.
Yeah, so that is a third-party publication.
Look at
it is possibly
you're pulling a Derik there, where you just reach over and grab a book.
It is possibly the best Call of Cthulhu character creation method. It does a life path, and it walks your character through from birth to their current position. It gets wild, these tables, but even if you're just picking instead of rolling, they're great. But every player I know so far that's used it has said, I'm never going to make a character without it again.
Got it.
So it's that good.
So cool. Brothless says, hello, how are you guys? Bro, we're pretty good. We got Donnie in the chat as well. Says, what up, freaks? Glad I could finally join. Yeah, well, you're not working on something, building some solar array death laser. Exactly. So sounds good. All right. And then there's some additional details as well. A name, birthplace. Then we equip our investigator. Our credit rating, as you mentioned, indicates our chances of likelihood of owning major possessions, such as house and car. The keeper will advise you on what other equipment an investigator may start out with. A player may buy additional items if they are available for purchase. So are we really because we're not an adventurer, right? So what kind of equipment would I be really starting with?
It depends. I mean, let's say your character is a police detective.
Sure.
Right. He's on the murder squad, and something happens, and he goes to the investigation, and he notices something odd with the scene. You might decide that your character has, fingerprinting kit or something else on them, which is perfectly fine.
Got it.
But it might also come down to the fact you might be poor, but you put a lot of money into, or a lot of points into your firearm skill, and be like, I can't afford a gun. You might say, is it possible that I had one from my time in the service, or whatever the case may be? And then, you work with the keeper in figuring out what are these other additional things that your character might have. Typically speaking, once again, it rarely comes up in play, but what does come up in play is if your character is a curator in a museum, and the police officer, let's say in this scenario, calls because he got hit on the head with a bust of a pharaoh. It's like, oh man, we got to bring in an Egyptian expert to find out. So they call the curator up in the middle of the night. He comes stumbling over there. And he does a thing, and then he starts investigating. Friday turns to Saturday, Saturday turns to Sunday, Sunday turns to Monday, Monday turns to Tuesday. Next thing you know, he's getting a call. Where have you been? Why have you been at work the last couple of days? There's that underpinning that they still have some semblance of a normal
job
life hold on to. Yeah.
Got it. No, that's interesting, right? There's this idea that you're not a full-time adventurer per se, right? These are just things that it's kind of like those weird things where you see these movies and you go and the movie ends and you're like, okay, what do they do? Do they go to work tomorrow? Like what? Okay, they stopped the portal and they killed the cultist that nobody will ever know existed. Okay, well, they still got to pay rent, right? So they still got to go
Yeah.
to work.
And we've had lots of players make characters that they make a new character, they'll play it in that section of the campaign and then go, there's no reason why this character really
Sure.
would continue on with the others. And we just let him go.
Retire. And I like this here. I mean, again, this is sort of a anti-simulationism, but I definitely appreciate this. It says, there's no need to write a detailed list of everything that your character owns. Just list the notable items. In many cases, starting investigators don't really have anything exceptional or worth writing down in the way of equipment anyways. That's fine. You'll soon be uncovering all sorts of strange and weird gear. And I like that. I like that but it's not just hand waved. It's just represented by this sort of concept of credit rating, right?
Yes.
Which I like. Okay. Here are some of the other methods that you talked about. Option number 1, you could start over and just start again. You could modify some of your low rolls. There is a point buy option, a quick fire method if you just want to kind of have probably like an array of types. You could even allow people potentially to go beyond the limits of human potential. Now I'm not going to worry about this cap on starting skill values, but that is something I thought about. If you can buy stuff with these points, can I just put 99 points or 100 points into a skill? And then I'm just I am the best at this of all time.
Yes, theoretically, yes. Although most keepers will say at the start of a campaign that the max for your starting character is 75 or 80.
Got it. But that still seems really high to me. Like 80% success.
While it lasts.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and it does say here, if you feel high skills are concerned, consider an upper limit such as 75%. Okay. I having never run this game, I feel like I would probably use that rule, right? Like, because I don't want people to be like literally, unless like maybe I might make an exception on like one particular skill or something like that. Like if your character literally was like an Olympic wrestler or something like that, and you were like a gold medalist, that's kind of like your character shtick. Like I could see that being a thing.
Characters, by the way,
yeah,
those types of characters are quintessential D&D first Call of Cthulhu characters. I always encourage them to make those characters, get it out of their system, because those characters will last maybe anywhere from 2 scenes to 2 sessions.
That's fantastic. No, please do it. Make your fighter. You'll see what happens. In case we're here on page 50, I think, in case you really didn't want to do the math, here is a table which shows you the halves and fifths all the way up to 100. Yes. All right.
And remember, this is in the Keeper book, because a lot of times you're going to have just a very basic stat block for like a monster occultist. So having that table handy is very helpful for the Keeper.
Vin says, shout out to page 49 with a $2 super chat. Look, I mean, I'm not going to be mad about it. If the game is going to make me do this level of fiddly math, I like that they give me this table that I can just use to just immediately access it, you know? All right. And here again is a example of the character sheet. I love, is this the official character sheet, Ben?
That is correct.
I love that this thing is a fucking countdown right there on the sheet. That is so much. See, we talk about this all the time on the thing. This actually excites me. This is the type of shit that when you've been playing RPGs as long as I have, this excites me. I talk a lot on this channel about the value of tactile experiences with a game. That presentation matters, and the way that a game presents itself is just as important as the mechanics. This luck or insanity track could just be a box, right, with a number, like a hit point box. Right? It could just say, this guy, Harvey here, his sanity's 45. And I could just go, erase it. Okay, it's 41. Okay, erase it. It's 35. But seeing it like that, and seeing that the last value is insane, or that the last value is out of luck, is so much more powerful to the feeling. Because, right, that's what this game is trying to do, right? It's trying to capture an experience or a feeling. Stuff like that seems subtle or seems meaningless, but I think it's actually really, really cool that is how that's done.
Literacy of seeing where you are on the track is what makes it really hit home.
Yeah.
And you can character sheet and go, wow, I have X amount of sessions left.
Right. It's a clock, right? It's a slow burn to your character's demise, right? Because I'm assuming, right, as either sanity or luck or both start slowly dwindling, you understand that at some point you are going to be at the mercy of the dice and they are not going to come up in your favor, right? Yeah, exactly, Michael. Every sci-fi horror game, or sorry, every sci-fi horror movie ever, Aliens, Alien, whatever, have done that thing where the aliens are swarming and you're watching the counter on the minigun and the rounds are depleting, 100 rounds, 30 rounds, and you're like, oh no, right? It's that tension builder, Thomas says, it's getting close to 4 a.m. here, but I don't want to be alone today. So you got promoted to my good night podcast. The theme of Cthulhu also fits my day oddly well. Well, I appreciate you staying on this late. Hopefully you can catch the rest of the VOD. We'll definitely cover character creation for sure for today. But I know it's stupid, but this is something that I think is actually really cool. That actually makes me really happy. Now, full transparency here, Ben. I'm worried that these investigator skills are too fiddly. Okay. Like, mechanical repair, natural world, like pilot aircraft. It's like psychology versus psychoanalysis. I'm a little worried that it could be a little too, persnickety, I guess would be the term I would use.
That's where you come into the concept of expanded skills, which I've always used, but it wasn't called expanded skills. It's just the way that I run. But lately, Chaosium has embraced it in their supplements, like one in Regency Cthulhu, where they talk about expanded. For example, we had a situation last week where someone didn't have lock picking, for example, but they wanted to pick up, just use mechanical repair instead. Or you might make it a dex check even. You might dex plus, like, for example, let's say someone we'll go back to our detective, right? He's like, I can't pick a lock, but my criminology is super high. Is chance in my study of criminals that I like interrogated or have an informant who is Larry the lockpicker? Can I either go grab him off the street and make him do this thing for me by intimidating, or maybe he told me a couple of tricks? I would say make a luck roll.
Got it.
Luck roll. And then they go, I succeeded. Great. So it happens that he did teach you a couple of his tricks. Use your criminology instead.
Yeah, I like that because, I just get into, I'm again, full transparency. One of the things that sort of, this happened to us when we, and again, we're new to the game, but when we sat down and we made Traveler characters, okay, and this was the Mongoose 2nd edition Traveler, which is like the current version of the game. And there was this moment where people were getting skills and they were taking things, and somebody had taken skill ups in engineering, and we realized that they had taken these skill ups in engineering, but you had to pick between jump drive versus like grav drive, basically light speed drive or, sub light speed drive. And the realization was they were like the ship's engineer, but they were basically going to be clueless as to the operations of the ship's, one of the two ships' engines, right? And it just felt very like, and Traveler has this idea of like that maybe a skill, if there's a certain skill that is like multifaceted, that if you have one training in it, you kind of have a vague general level of training, which kind of assuages it. But there is sometimes that cross overlap with skills. And this is true of D20 too. This isn't just a Call of Cthulhu thing. It's just something that I personally have grown to be very a little distasteful for. Whereas like a game like 2D20, Star Trek Adventures, right, I think gives you just a ton more latitude, for covering what computers means, right? It's a very broad, very expansive skill. Lollipop, by the way, before you respond, Ben, because he has a shout out to you, says, I'm so glad this system is getting covered. Thank you, Ben, for coming on the stream. I'm looking forward to catching it all on the VOD, on the VOD. Thank you, Lollipop, for that, and I hope you appreciate the VOD. All right, Ben, my rant about skills.
Yeah, so I was going to say that it's also very much left up to the keeper. So one keeper might decide to be a bit a stickler on some things, and other times other keepers might be very open on it. That affects the feel of the game. I find it works best to be giveth and taketh away. Like,
okay,
I will be very reasonable in some circumstances where it just makes sense, right? But if I feel that they're power gaming a little bit, or they're being a little too meta about it, or if they are maybe trying to roll on a skill they're good at just so they can tick the success box or something like that, I'd be disinclined to do it. And there've been some time where I feel that the time or the pressure is just, it's too tight. In other words, you have to know the thing because, the bad guys are knocking down the door, and, your brain wouldn't be able realistically to be able to work through all this other gymnastics that you're doing right now. So I would just say no in that case, or it has to be this skill or that skill, whatever the case may be. But the funny part about this game is we've had players make rolls where they're like, I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. It really has to be this skill. And they're like, oh man, I only have 5% in it. Give it a shot. And they'll roll a 3 or a 2. I mean,
they always have that chance. Only thing I'll say here is I really do appreciate games like Torchbearer, Burning Wheel, Mouse Guard that have this idea of beginner's luck, or have this concept of like you could tap your nature. That's a Mouse Guard / Torchbearer thing. But there are these options available to you to sort of represent the fact that, yes, it's nice if you have this one specific skill. But you mentioned this expansion system. Don Pokey is talking about these. He says, he hasn't even gotten into writing skills. No, I saw those on the character sheet, and I already saw that like certain things like fighting is subdivided into sub skills, and that you're like, oh, I have fighting. You're like, yeah, no, you have fighting brawl, but you are using a spear. So that is a completely different skill, right?
And I do pretty sticklery when it comes to stuff like that, like rifles versus pistols and things like that.
And my gut instinct is to hate that, just because that's just a level of fastidiousness that I don't really particularly care to sort of design. But I do have a question as we get into these skills. By the way, another great example of the simulationist is, hey, what does this percentage mean in terms of your skills ability? Oh, you're 50% or higher, you're a professional. You can eke out a living. Oh, you're 75th percentile. You are an expert, advanced degree, PhD. If you're 90% plus, one of the leading people in the world. So again, I love that analog. But do the skills operate completely independently from the characteristics? And if so, when would I make, like, is there not like a skill for, are like skills strictly related to like learnable activities?
Yes.
I got it. Okay.
Yeah. So the case can be made in that case, whether what is best served by it, making a skill check or making it be an ability check. For example, the way I usually do it is I up the difficulty if it's an ability score. For example, someone's trying to climb a wall. There is a climb skill. You don't have any.
I can see it. I can see it.
So I might say, depending on the circumstance, well, this has to be climb, but make a luck roll to see if you find a handhold that might help you in the roll, and then I'll give a bonus die on the roll. Or if they go, but I'm so strong, I should be able to. I go, okay, that's fair, but you have to have a hard success or better in order to strengthen stuff.
So, I mean, I will say that the game does seem to give you a lot of tools and sort of options to sort of play with it. You mentioned bonus die. I don't even know what that is yet. I don't think we've gotten to it. But in terms of this skill list, again, I'm just a little concerned about how difficult it is. That being said, if there's options and ways, and there's even, kind of ways that you said with these expanded concepts or resulting to a characteristic scale, like it feels like it gives you more options. But like you said, right, it might be one of those situations where it's like, well, you could use this to do that, but if you had the exact right skill, your success would be clean and beautiful. But in this case, even if you succeed, it's not as good as you wanted to do. Shy Knight tipped $5. Thank you, Shy Knight. Sir Ben, I hope never to meet your game on a dark and stormy night. Thank you for joining the stream. Well, thank you, Shy Knight. The Ben, if Ben's not killing you in Call of Cthulhu, he's rocks falling and you're dying is the meme from our more old school sentimentalities. Okay. Now we get to pushing. This is on page 55 of the book. It says, for each skill, a number of examples are provided for what might constitute a pushed roll. See page 84 for pushing a roll. Now, I am going to jump ahead here because I do want to know what the hell this means exactly. So I'm going to jump ahead to 84.
Skill has a specific example of what pushing
Got it.
me, we usually just go with our gut and interpretation at the table.
100%. Yeah.
It's helpful to have a clue.
Okay. So pushing a skill roll, pushing is kind of a concept that, even new games use, Forbidden Lands use, Year Zero Engine uses it. Usually it means that you get a second bite at the apple. Pushing a skill roll provides the player with a second and final attempt to achieve a goal. A pushed roll is only allowed if it can be justified. So there's definitely a to do it kind of mentality there. And it is up to the player to do this. Whenever a player asks, can I push the roll? The keeper should always ask, what action are you taking to push the situation? It is not for the keeper to simply say yes or no. It is for the player to describe the extra effort or time taken to justify the pushed roll. If the player is stuck, perhaps other players or the keeper might offer a suggestion. So is it safe to say you can always push a roll, assuming?
I encourage my players to push rolls.
Got it.
They oftentimes will choose to take the fail over the push.
Because, okay, well, we'll get into this, but
They'll see why.
That is a good thing. Okay. By making a pushed roll, the player is upping the ante, right? This is double or nothing, right? Essentially. Literally. I mean, it basically is that. And giving the keeper permission to bring dire consequences should the roll be failed a second time. Pushing a roll means pushing the situation to the limit. And they give, a couple of examples here. It is important to note that a pushed roll is not simply a re-roll. Time always passes. Okay, so that's interesting. It is not just a re-roll. It's literally a situation where in the narrative, you did it and then you kind of did it again, but with more gusto, right?
Yeah.
So that is that's kind of different than the way that a lot of games work.
Time and then you revisit it again. The fail's already hanging out there.
Right.
That's how you're recovering.
When making a pushed roll, the goal must still be achievable. The skill and difficulty level normally remain the same. Only skill and characteristic rolls can be pushed, not luck, not sanity, not combat, nor rolls to determine damage or sanity loss. Interesting. So basically, it is a narratively justifiable within the simulation, within the game, within the shared narrative of the game, way to get a second crack at it. And by the way, going back to odds, if I have a 60% or something in a skill and I can re-roll that, I have a really damn good chance of succeeding. I mean, that really is a great chance for me to succeed. And it's essentially free. It doesn't cost me any resources. It doesn't cost me stress or strain or something like that. But knowing that it is going to escalate the consequences should I fail, really does create that great, what do you do moment, right? I mean, that is a great mechanic for player agency because it's literally giving them the power of do-over, but are you willing to pay that, price, and by the way, correct me if I'm wrong here, what I'm reading is correct. If you succeed, you succeed. Right?
That's correct.
It's not like a situation where it's like, if it works out in your favor, it was all upside.
There is no success at a cost.
Right. And that is kind of brutal. And I see where for this type of game, that is very, very appealing because the idea of me going, I'm only 30% to do this. I failed. Fuck it. I'm going in.
That happens all the time.
Yeah.
Too.
And I'm the type of player, by the way, that if I go out in a blaze of glory, I'm totally fine with that ending for my character. But the idea that if I pull that off, it's like you just get everything. You get to have your cake and eat it too, and that's very interesting. It's not what I expected from that mechanic, actually, at all. So that's really interesting, huh? I mean, I love that. I kind of love that.
Yeah, I can only say how my table runs. But yeah. Our culture in our group we rarely push rolls, even though I offer
Interesting.
them
Now,
all the time.
This doesn't surprise me at all, but Boothby says, pushing rolls is awesome. My players are too terrified to ever try it though. Whereas I can tell you, if I were to play this game with players like Smith, and Kaz, rolls would be pushed, right? people would, I mean, again, Dread, the Jenga horror game, has a rule where if the tower falls, you fail and you die. But if a player deliberately smashes the tower down, they succeed and then they die. Let's just say that a lot of people are like, I've never seen a person do that. I've seen that happen every time I've played that game with my group of friends, because that is something that they are totally willing to sort of embrace. And Rick said that he likes push rolls so much, he poached it for Traveler. And just seems like he just lifted it and put it into Traveler, which also makes sense because Traveler is also a percentage system.
And it would work really well in Traveler, where the game
or 2d6 system.
It embraces the idea of failing it will make things worse.
Yeah, it's out of the frying pan into the fire, right? I mean, that's basically what both of these games are kind of all about.
You're on board if you're playing Traveler with that idea already.
Exactly. Okay, so interesting. All right. So we got a long list of skills here. Now, I missed it because we're not going 100% through everything here. What are these percentages next to them? Is that like a default percentage?
Yep. So you have a base percent of being able to succeed in all of the skills.
So if I put points into that, does it start from there and go up?
Yep.
Got it.
So if you have base 10%, if you put 1% in, you have 11.
There's a skill called Chainsaw, Ben.
Yeah.
Come on. Chainsaw? Oh, it's for fighting. Of course it is. Interesting. And a lot of this seems to make there's sort of a simulationism here too, right? Like driving is 20%, but because most people are probably going to know how to drive to a certain degree. Whereas engineering is 1%, because the average person isn't going to know shit about engineering, right?
Yeah, and for driving, I only have driving rolled as a skill when it's a situation where you are trying to do something difficult in the vehicle.
Got it.
We naturally assume people know how to drive.
Right. Drive under duress is basically what that means, yeah.
Exactly. They know how to ride a horse or whatever the case may be.
And I'm not going to go through all of these, but again, it's kind of showing you examples of how you might set the difficulty level for all of these skills. And it also talks about, like you said, the sample consequences if you push that roll and you go in. So I'm assuming on the character sheet, and maybe I missed it, I'm going to scroll back up to the character sheet really quick. So the skills have halves and fifths as well. So if you might cut one of these in half, or you might take 20% of it if it's an extreme. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of things, for example, spot hidden, which is a very much used skill in this game.
Which one's that?
Spot hidden.
Spot hidden. Okay.
Spot hidden is a skill where a lot of situations might be, if they make a hard spot hidden roll, they'll notice that the carpet, is slightly askew in one corner of the room.
Kind of a degrees of success type thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Got it. Interesting. Ooh, nice brain in the jar. Okay. So a lot of skills. Would you say you call for more skill rolls than you do characteristic rolls?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, by a huge margin.
And
we tend to roll a lot during a session as well.
A lot of skill checks, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lots and lots.
Now we're getting into chapter 5, which is the game system. Which is good. And it'll probably get into this. So I just want to read this here because I think this is important here. It says when to roll dice. This is something I think that is very important to talk about in any game system. So I'm curious to see what they say here. While there is a large amount of fun to be had in playing a role-playing game, and much of it is derived from discussing your character's actions with your fellow players and the keeper without rolling any dice whatsoever, or in Powered by the Apocalypse language, the conversation. Players declare what their investigators are doing and often speak in character to better express themselves. The keeper states what the NPCs are doing and describes the world around the investigators. So far, so good. Everyone accepts what everyone else says and builds upon it to create an interesting story. Until, of course, they don't accept what someone else is saying. For example, an investigator doesn't believe what Old Man Marsh is saying about the whereabouts of the missing library books. When someone says something that you don't like, you can ask for clarification or you can disagree, but ultimately, if you don't accept what someone says, what is happening in the story, the situation can now be resolved with dice. It's a very kind of antagonistic way to look at dice rolling.
Yes. Well, I mean, like, you have to remember the game we're playing.
Yeah. it's interesting because it's kind of like, basically it's like I'll say something, you'll say something, we'll all just say something, and then eventually it's like, no, I don't want to be shot or killed by this monster, or like the GM's like, no, you can't just drive through this rush hour traffic with these cultists chasing after you with a submachine gun or something. We're gonna need some dice to involve. It's kind of the same principle as like Powered by the Apocalypse introducing dice, but it's done in a very different kind of style, and it's interesting. You don't see language like that in most games these days.
No, and it's a very deliberate language as well.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. I believe it.
This is the game that really embraces the idea of GM fiat.
Got it.
Like wholeheartedly embraces it, because you are giving carte blanche. They push a roll, they fail it. That gives the keeper you're just a silver platter.
You might say the GM can make a hard move. By the way, we got some, not super chat, but Vin says, what I like about the specificity of skills is that it drives home the limited nature of investigators. That's interesting. That's not something I kind of thought about, but I guess that's true. It's like, look, I'm not, I always say it's stupid to me that your D&D adventurer doesn't know how to climb a rope or ride a horse, because it's like, you're an adventurer. You're supposed to be this kind of larger than life here. No, your character's not a larger than life hero. You're a schlub who works down at the docks and, packing meat. Like, you don't know shit about particle physics, sorry, I guess that kind of makes sense. I think that's interesting. Again, reframing my expectations around the concept of a game where you look at your character sheet and go, shit, nothing I have applies. Yeah. You're way out of your league here, buddy. You've
had that happen where they go, we're going to have to get Larry the lockpick. We're going to have to get him. And then they're like, well, that's a problem because then he's going to know stuff.
Yeah.
Then what do you do?
Right. Bro says, investigators in this system really feel like they are fragile humans, which works great for horror because they could die or go insane at any moment. Yeah. Woofy says, nothing you have applies because you spent 70% on guns. Boothby. Ultimately, if you don't accept what someone says about what's happening in the game, the situation can be resolved with dice. Likewise, you could simply say that your investigator managed to climb to the top of the church's steeple in the pouring rain at midnight. However, if there's no dice roll to test your investigator's skill, there's no tension or drama either. And I think that's where you mentioned, like, the keeper has that ability to set the barometer. What is difficult in my game? What, like you said, I don't call for a drive roll if you're just driving a car, because I don't think that necessitates a roll. If someone says, oh, I'm going to, climb over the fence and sneak into the warehouse parking lot, you just go, yeah, sure, you can do that. But if, there's barbed wire and there's dogs and, and there guard dogs, then it might be a different situation. And you might make that call that it requires a roll.
Or it might just be fun.
Yeah. Equally, there's no need to roll dice for everything. For example, your investigator is a drive auto skill, but dice don't need to be rolled every time you get in a car. Exactly. If you say your investigator is driving to the local historical society, unless someone takes issue with that, it's done. Simply move on with the story. And literally what we just described. If a car full of cultists is chasing you, then that happens. All right. And there's a nice little post-it note here. The keeper's decision is final. While the Call of Cthulhu rules are designed to be as clear and flexible as possible, from time to time, you may encounter a situation in the game which the rules do not provide a solution, in which such circumstances, the keeper's decision is final. Players are encouraged to offer suggestions and ideas. However, the players should respect the keeper's decision and move on with the game. All right, so we got our skill. The GM sets a difficulty, regular, hard, extreme. Got it. And that's full skill, half skill, 20%. Which is brutal.
Yes. Yep.
Do you use extreme a lot?
On occasion, where you mostly see extreme is in combat.
Got it.
Extreme successes that will end a fight essentially.
Got
it. Get an success.
But
you use extreme before. Sometimes you have to get an extreme. For example, if you have an opposed roll against anything from the mythos, any of those creatures would have hundreds in it, whatever stat. If you're fighting something as a 200. Right? For example, if you don't get an extreme, there's no way you're going to succeed at all, because the percentile of the thing you're fighting, the chance of them getting a hard success is already a given.
Yeah.
At the least. So you need to get at least an extreme to be able to one up that.
Got it. So your best is just to meet what they're just putting out. Rolling the dice, success or failure. There are two possible outcomes of a roll, success or failure. The player states a goal and then rolls the dice. If the dice rolls equal to or below, so it's equal, okay. So it's equal to or below the required number, then the goal is fully achieved. If the dice roll is below half or fifth of the specified skill, the goal will not necessarily be performed to a higher standard. Any further interpretation of the roll is at the discretion of the keeper. So by and large, it is defined as a binary type situation. Success, if you roll below, they have achieved the goal that was set to and agreed before the roll. I like this idea of like, we're very carefully bartering here. The player should be encouraged to participate in describing the outcome. Thus, the player and the keeper are both described in outcome roll. I love that. I think more players should be involved with the role, but I also think that the GM has a place to play there as well. Failure. How the character has failed is entirely up to the keeper, although players may throw in suggestions. Initial failure at a skill roll should not usually inflict damage or sanity loss, but this depends on the circumstances. A failed roll could represent failure to act rather than a failed attempt. Worse things may happen if the character chooses to push the roll. Save the what's the worst that could happen for style consequences for push roll. I think that's brilliant. I think that actually is great because players don't like to, if the consequences of failure is, yeah, you couldn't do it. Most players balk at that already. And so when you go, or you could push the roll, you know, that's a very tempting carrot to bite into.
That Faustian deal.
Yeah. Yeah, the Faustian deal.
Ultimately, where the game kind of really hits its stride is when they have to choose between two terrible choices.
Correct.
They both are terrible.
Right. And you know, I've always said before, like one of my favorite mouse guard examples is where you know, a person failed a roll and the boat sank and they either had the choice to save their brother from drowning or save the medicine that's going to save the town of people they've never met before. And it's like, that sucks. Well, don't fail. I don't know what to tell you, you know, roll better. Rick with a $20 super chat says $20 just because Ben is on. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate the love for Mr. Ben. Vin with another super chat coming at us. The difficulties remind me of why I like using S to drive N, meaning, for those of you who don't speak our language, meaning why I like using simulationism or simulation to drive the narrative. Cthulhu skills, etc., really help to drive and visualize the narrative despite being simulationist. Right. You're building the story out of more concrete framework rather than just imagining how it could be and then sort of filling in the details to support what you are structuring. Instead, you're starting with the building blocks. And I agree with you to a certain extent. It does create a different style of game, but the outcomes can be sometimes a little bit more, I'll use the term shenaniganous, I suppose would be the term I would use. But, and now we're back to that pushing the roll that we had jumped to ahead before. All right. Oh, nice. I was going to ask this. Foreshadowing failure. Before rolling the dice for a pushed roll, the consequences of failure may be foreshadowed by the keeper, but I would totally do this all the time. To foreshadow, the keeper says, if you fail, followed by as much detail as they desire. And I love this, not because of the game rule or because of the player agency that this is instilling, which it does. It's a ton, but because how well this works for that dread, that feeling of like, I am just, I'm this close to everything I want, but then this horrible reality is sitting there, laying there, waiting. Because we talked about before, horror and terror. We talked about this on your stream, but our stream about horror. There's that difference between the horror of the unknown versus the horror of this known terrible thing that is kind of hanging out there, waiting, you know, in the dark. I like that. I like that rule a lot. Wow. Let's see here. And again, right? The player might go, no, I'm not going to push. I'll take my failure. I'll take my lumps. That's really interesting. It's imperative that the keeper focuses on an interesting consequence rather than just flat failure. So there is still that idea of failing forward built into the DNA of this game. So, I mean, again, it's easy to sort of dismiss it as just like a super trad, old school, kill everybody, ha 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 ha, make a new character, right? Meat grinder. But it's not. It's in its 7th edition. They may not have changed the core structure of the game, but over the past, 40 years, they have, I think adopted some of the better and best practices of role-playing games.
They've definitely adapted the way people interface with the game now. Although many people run it super trad still.
Sure.
But it's still very different. I mean, 7E for me, I think we talked about this before, but 7E for me, it took, I don't know, like 4 years before I actually started switching over. Because I thought that this did up the power of the PCs a little bit too much.
Okay.
So you think they're like really stripped down?
I'm like, this
actually have way more agency than they used to.
I mean, and again, skipping ahead here a little bit, but I was curious about this, and it is in the game. But I love this. A fumble is 5%, but a crit success is only 1%. Like that is a like literal mathematical sort of representation of you are not favored in this universe. This is not some equal chance. So to me, I'm like, oh man, this game is stacked against you. But a nat roll of a 1 is basically you achieve the goal, you get everything you wanted. It was super awesome. And a 96 to 100 is always a fumble.
Yeah. And I would say extreme successes are fantastic when they come up. But there is that sense of you're forestalling the inevitable, which is the other thing that makes it so. It's a fantastic moment, but it's also very bittersweet because that's one. Well, out of the 700 times I rolled dice in this campaign, I got one extreme success, unlike in a D20 thing where like
it's fairly common,
much easier to crit.
Yeah. Okay, so a couple things here I want to talk about because we mentioned them. And there's kind of an interesting note that I wanted to kind of key in on, which is this luck. It says luck rolls may be called for by the keeper when circumstances external to any investigator are in question, or such as when determining the fickle hand of fate. If a skill or characteristic is applicable to a situation, it should be rolled rather than luck. What's interesting to me, Ben, is that is almost the exact same language that Magpie uses in like Root for trusting fate, where they basically say if any other move applies, you should probably use that move, or you should use that move. But if it just seems like it's a situation where this isn't a matter of skill, this is, the person isn't being acrobatic, they're just blindly leaping out of the window before the bomb goes off. This isn't about your acrobatic skill. This isn't about your dexterity. It's about just your luck. And so would you say that luck kind of fills in that same role in the game system, which is sort of this kind of low level, generic, when all else fails, close your eyes, pray, spin, and fire one off?
But we use luck for all sorts of things. For example, if you're playing set in the 1920s, let's say.
Yeah.
And even if you're in New York City after, midnight, let's say, the chance of hailing a cab is greatly diminished. So when something happens and someone's bleeding out and they drag them down to the street and they're like, we got to get him to the hospital now, I always will say, well, let's see if luck has it. Let's see if a attack happens to swing by.
And that's even cooler because I thought luck was just this resource, right? Because I saw that track, right? That you can be out of luck. But the idea that it's also a stat that you're rolling against, essentially, it makes that trade-off even more brutal than we had already done. And in fact, it does say here, you will find an optional rule for spending luck to alter die rolls at the end of this chapter. So we'll get to that.
Yeah, if the keeper lets you spend luck, then you're actually losing against that stat.
Right.
And the way Call of Cthulhu works is if you have a group luck roll, in other words, if there are multiple investigators and only one person's making the luck for the group, it's always the character with the lowest luck score.
Of course it is. I was going to say the highest, the lowest. Of course. Brutal. Okay. Intelligence rolls and idea rolls. An intelligence roll may be rolled for the keeper when investigators attempting to solve some sort of puzzle or other kind. By rolling equal to or lower, the player will receive a solution from the keeper. This might include solving a crossword puzzle or answering a riddle. An idea roll is different to an intelligence roll, although made in the same manner by using your intelligence characteristic. An idea roll is usually proposed by the players when their investigators have become stuck. And I think we talked about this a little bit, but again, one of my real concerns with a game like this is, look, my character is an investigator. I'm not. Like, I get it. There's that, we always talk about this, right? There's that sort of interaction point, like even in old school games, it's like, are you searching for traps or is your thief searching for traps? And there's kind of a merging, a blending of lines there, because if I describe what my thief is doing and that works, it's like, and that is cool. But at the end of the day, these things are about mysteries and investigating. And I can easily imagine worlds. I mean, there's literally entire game systems like Gumshoe, which are built around the idea of sometimes mysteries don't work because people get stuck and they miss something. They didn't put two and two together, whatever, what have you. And this idea roll here is a wonderful, with just a quick first reading, sort of concession to that. And
really interesting is, depending on your group, for example, in my main group, the Monday night group, they don't really ask for idea rolls ever. They want to figure it out themselves. Right. Every now and then, maybe every couple of months or so, I'll say, you know what, make an idea roll. And then they get all excited. They're like, oh, that means we missed something and there's something Ben totally wants to point us toward.
Right.
And they know that this is the time to, like, let's pay extra special attention.
Yeah. And I could see people getting very, reliant upon it and potentially abusing it. But by and large, I think that this is a very good thing to add to the game. I do want my players to pay attention, and I think it's much more satisfying if I was running some sort of a mystery and when they realize that it's the curator of the museum that's behind the murders, when they put that together, that's way more satisfying than some idea roll. And
I would say that early on with newer players, you do have more idea rolls. You're asking for them more often, or they might be asking more often until they start learning. I mean, this game definitely has its own style, and
sure,
it does take a few go arounds before you really kind of get it under your fingers. And the idea roll and the no rolls are great, like little safety nets, basically.
And no roll is basically recall knowledge. It is, what does your character know something about this? And it's based off of your education stat.
The other thing that's important to know, COC has a very strong one-shot community.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of tournament style games, a lot of convention games, lots and lots of very short scenarios. And this is where those kinds of roles will help move it along, where you don't want to spend an hour and a half of them trying to find the map hidden under the rug. They just got to know where it is to push it forward, because you only have 4 hours to get to the end.
Right. Yeah, I like Rick's point. The idea roll takes the place of the convenient DM NPC who shows up and goes, oh, maybe you should try this. So at least it feels like the genesis is still with the PCs rather than some externality, like, oh, the sconce falls apart randomly and you realize that the wall, like just some complete total bullshit. Okay, so now we get into this bonus dice and penalty dice, this is new to me. I didn't know this existed in this system. And again, just as a reminder, we can fumble, we can fail, we can get a regular success, a hard success, an extreme success, or a critical success.
And adding these other dice greatly swings it.
All right, so this is brand new to me. I didn't know this was a thing. Sometimes prevail. Okay, so this is kind of the difference between setting a DC higher or lower versus giving them a bonus or a penalty to their D20 roll, right? Is that kind of the way I would sort of express this?
Typically, it's like an assist, you might say. Like if you have two characters that are doing research in a library, for example, you're not going to have them both make library use rolls. Instead, I will say, Neo's the higher skill, take the person with the lower skill. You don't get to make a roll, so you can't check the skill. But instead, I'll give a bonus die to the other character.
Got it. So prevailing conditions, environmental, available time can either hinder or benefit. So if someone says, I'm going to spend all week, that doesn't necessarily change the difficulty of the task, but you might grant a bonus die.
That is correct. Mm-hmm.
So you roll an extra tens digit. Got it. So you're rolling an extra D percentage. That's huge. Like, that's really huge. Like, I mean, if you have a 50% chance of success, if you roll an extra bonus die, then you basically now have a 75% chance of success, I think, roughly, give or take.
Yeah, it's It's an exponential increase or decrease.
Yeah. Oh, right. Is the penalty die you take the lower? Oh, brutal. I just wouldn't do it. I'm just like, I'm not rolling.
You don't have a choice. That's just what the keeper wants.
When I say higher, I meant lower, because it's reversed.
Yeah,
right?
Worser.
You more worse. Right. So if I roll like a 10 and a 90, I have to take the 90, which is brutal.
That is correct. Which is great because I think you see that you could have had it.
Right. Oh, again, I love the tactical nature of, these kind of rolls. Because it really lets you feel the bonus. I even like, I don't know if they do this on purpose. This is like a Smith and Derik thing, but like when we play, let's say we're playing Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. This is the thing that pops up. Bless is a spell. Clerics can cast it. It targets 3 people and they get to add a D4 to any of their basically D20 rolls. Aaron loves to have like 3, white or sparkly D4s that he will hand out physically to the players at the table and says, I want you to roll my D4 when you're rolling that. I want you to see that die and realize that's not one of my dice. Oh, that's because the cleric cast Bless on me. And I like that in this example, they use different colored dice to sort of represent, like I want you to know which one was your die and which one was the bonus die. And I kind of really like that. I don't know that, obviously, I'm sure a lot of people just roll 2D10 or 2D percentage, but the way that they even phrase it is something that I like, because I like you said, when you give that assistance, I want them to know which of the D percentage dice was the difference. Was it them or was it the person who was helping them that really made the difference? I think that even helps tie into the narrative of like how you would describe what that library montage scene. If the helper die rolls a 90, they're just making a mess of things. And, like you find them sleeping under the table, under a pile of books, it's like that classic scene where they just fell asleep rather than, in the middle of a big book, they're just passed out because they didn't help at all. They didn't do shit. So I really like the idea of that. Okay. That's cool. You got 3 modes of difficulty. You've got ways to add bonus and penalty dice. It's not too much. It's not, hey, set infinite DCs. It's just, is it regular, hard, or extreme? Right? That's pretty good.
So it's worth bearing mention that you could have up to 2 of either.
So you can have
there are
2 negative dice or 2 positive dice.
You're rolling 2 penalty die, which means you're rolling 3 dice for the 10th place, and you have to take the worst of the 3. Or in the other opposite direction, you might have 2 bonus dice that you're rolling.
Now I'm going to skip ahead real quick from the advancement, because that is the, if you do the thing, if you play your investigator, assuming you don't die, how do you get better? But I do want to skip ahead because I am curious about this optional rule for spending luck. Because my idea was that I thought that was just the rule. The fact that the character sheet is designed to track luck suggests that this is something that is, the case.
I can sum up the skill advancement really quickly. Basically, it works exactly like Guard or Burning Wheel.
Okay.
You succeeded a roll, and then in order to advance it, you have to take the roll again during a specific time period set aside, and you have to fail it.
Got it. So you need to succeed and fail.
You need to succeed and then fail it. And then once you make that assessment roll, you clear off the check mark, and you have another chance of doing it. But once you succeed at a skill, you cannot advance it until you have that assessment phase.
How much does it advance when it advances?
1d10.
Oh, 1d10.
Yeah.
Wow. That's actually pretty sweet. Number one, obviously awesome if you roll 10, horrifying if you roll a 1, which is exciting in its own right. But that's a lot.
About it. The beautiful part about it is this is what encourages the person to make the locksmith check.
Of course.
Though they don't, because if they, right,
well, also to your point,
some weird chance they pass, now they have to fail it, and they almost guaranteed to get higher.
And I will also, heap praise about this because I also, Burning Wheel obviously does the same thing, but obviously this game predates it. But what I really like about this too is if you have a high skill, you got to fail. So you're not going to get it by just doing all the mundane, easy shit. You're going to have to put yourself in a situation where you're doing something hard or extreme because you need that chance to fail to advance.
Yes. And as your skill goes up, it gets much harder to advance it, because you might succeed every day.
Sure.
But in assessment, you then have to fail it.
Got
and
it.
The law of averages just
Right. So it becomes much harder to advance once you get better, which makes a certain amount of sense. So in other words, it's kind of very easy to move up from the lower echelons of a skill. But then once you get into that 50s, 60s, it probably, kind of starts to come on the other side of the hump. Yeah, about 80.
About 80 is you're not going to see anything above an 80.
Got it. Let's see here. Shadram says it's not optional. It is optional, but everyone should use it. Talking, I think, about spending luck. And we got a $5 super chat from Zachary Lane. I have never seen a system talk live. Welcome, Zachary. I listen to the VODs at work, though. I'm reading through Fabula Ultima right now. Fantastic book. And I'm running Dungeon World in a week. Another classic that I think... I got my Fabula Ultima book right here. Love that game. We're playing Pathfinder 2 tomorrow, which I'm excited for. It'll be fun to get some minis on the grid, and Aaron's really excited to throw out some 20-foot radius fireballs, and I can't blame him. That is good, fun times. But I got to admit, I really am looking forward to getting Fabula Ultima to the game as well. But thank you so very, very much. Vin says Dungeon World vomit, whereas I think Dungeon World is the delightful game. It is a wonderful fantasy heartbreaker. It is a fantastic way to introduce the Powered by Apocalypse concepts. And thank you. All right. Vin does give him the shout out for Fabula Ultima. Though. Okay. Optional rules, aka mandatory rules. Spending luck. After the player has made a skill roll, which is a skill or a characteristic, okay, luck points may be spent to alter the roll. The player can use luck points to alter the roll on a 1-for-1 basis. These are deducted from your luck score, which will reduce the chance of passing a future luck score roll, as we talked about before. Luck points may not be spent on luck rolls. Okay, that makes sense. Damage rolls, sanity rolls, or rolls to determine how much sanity you lose. A player may spend any amount of luck points, any amount, up to obviously your current luck value. But I'm cashing this in. I am going to pass this. I have 7% chance of succeeding. All right, I'll spend 40, all my luck. I'll just get it. Wow.
Yep. I've seen it.
Wow. You've seen it. Okay. Wow. When a skill roll is failed, the player has the option to push or spend. You don't get 3 bites at the apple. Ooh.
No, however.
Okay.
Depending on the campaign you're running and like I said, I don't believe in lethal games, but I do very much believe in a lethal world. And
sure.
World is very lethal.
You can tell yourself that. All right. Continue.
And
wow.
I do allow both.
Oh.
I allow to be spent on push rolls as well, because for me, it's not the consequences of pushing that I'm concerned about, really.
Got it.
But I do want to get them. I want that luck.
You want to burn out the luck. I mean, I you know what? I think if I played this game for any amount of time, I think I would end up doing the exact same thing. I think I would, because to me that
over time it make a difference.
Yeah, I love it. I kind of love it. All right, criticals, fumbles, and firearm malfunctions always apply. They cannot be. Also, no skill improvement is earned if luck points were used to alter the dice roll. I like that. So you can't.
That is correct.
Yeah,
or if it's pushed.
Got it. Okay. Oh, or if it's pushed. That's good to know. That's good to know.
On a push roll. So if you failed, you pushed it and you succeeded, you don't get to check.
All right.
Success.
Now I see something here that I did not expect to see. Recovering luck points. After each session of play, you may make an improvement check for their luck. This is rolled in the same way as for skill improvement. You roll a D100, and if it's over your luck score, aka you fail it, they add D10 to their luck. So a person who's really unlucky will likely regain some of their luck. An investigator's luck score
kind of run that slightly house ruled as well.
Okay.
Because once again, it depends on how lethal your world is, right? Since my world is, I would say, fairly lethal.
Yeah.
I have characters. Your first character starts at an extremely high luck score, but it's not replenishing.
Oh, okay.
So you starting with 45 luck or 50 luck, I'll give you 80, but you can't ever go back.
Got it. Okay. And now seeing how this game operates, I can understand how that changes some of the mentality. It basically gives you more. It's like you burn brighter but shorter in a way, right? Because like you can have a bigger, more impactful change in the short time, but then once you're past that point, the candle's out, right? Like I want
the players to have the control over that break if possible.
Yeah. Okay.
So they can pull the chute whenever they want, or they can just slowly let it drip down. It's entirely up to them. So they're like controlling their descent, so to speak, which is why I switched to that model.
Got it. All right, so we talked about rewards of experience. You can develop your skills, and it's not an XP based system. It's a use it and in the game type system, which I like. During the investigator development phase, you can also have the opportunity to gain sanity points through their investigator spending time with an aspect from their own backstory. Now, we probably won't get to this, so there is a way to sort of bring your back from the maw of madness. It sounds like you can check your credit rating and review your finances. There come those space mortgages. They're coming. I'm sorry, extra dimensional great old one mortgages. And you can reduce all sanity limits by 1. See, getting used to the awfulness, page 169. So I'm assuming this means after a while you become sort of inured to the fact that things are so horrible and awful, and your mind is like, it's just a multidimensional being. You've seen one multidimensional being, you've seen them all.
Yeah, it has also to do part of it with the way that the game works, where you can't correlate the contents. At one point, your brains are so scrambled that it like the stuff falls off. But the other thing is, this game severely penalizes you from doing evil or bad things to other people. For example, if you don't have a background as a soldier, law enforcement, or criminal, firing a handgun causes immediate sand loss.
Wow. No shit.
Doesn't matter if you hit or not. Just the fact that your character was willing to do it. And many times you have to pass a willpower check first, or fail a willpower check rather, because that represents your character's better nature. Like, wait a minute. No, I'm going down a road. I can't go back.
Got it.
And we have it happen all the time. It is a lot of fun. Kind
of a Pendragon-esque component to that. Yeah, that's interesting. Again, going to that idea of the emulation. Sigma Y with a $5 super chat, which I cannot answer, but Ben maybe can. Do people play Call of Cthulhu campaigns, or does the higher lethality lead to a lot more one-shots / under 5 session type games? How long is the average game? And by that, I assume they mean like campaign. Ben, I'll let you answer that, because
so it depends on the group. For example, for Horror on the Orient Express, it took us 4 years, but many groups finish it in about a year, which to us is ridiculously fast. I've also know of many groups that make it through only losing 1 or 2 characters, whereas we lost 70 something.
70?
70.
70.
Yeah.
70.
So it really depends on the group and, these conversations that you're going to have up front. Like, how are we setting up successions? How are we going to keep it moving forward?
I'm curious, like, at the time where I get it. It's Call of Cthulhu. People die. But, like, do you find that your players become, like, fatalistic and detached after they've lost their 3rd or 4th or 5th character?
It depends on the player. Some players, you're going to go through these, like, ebb and flows where you might really be attached for a character and then you lose them. And it's a little bit of a bummer. You might struggle for a little bit going to one character and up 2 characters. And then that 3rd character after your favorite one died, you're like, okay, this guy's feeling pretty good. But I have found that if your character lasts too long, it hits a lot harder. There's kind of a sweet spot, but we average every 3 or 4.
Lose them before you become attached.
Yeah, gotta kill your darlings.
Yeah,
but
that's great.
I was going to add to the question about how long do they last. There's no real answer to it, because, for example, this one group that I'm running, they're all very experienced keepers. But they're players, and I'm keeping for them. And we've playing basically a one-shot, but it's taking us 6 sessions to get through it, because we are just really absorbing the atmosphere and letting it slowly build. But I could have done it as a one-shot, and it would have been fun, but it would have had a very different feel. And I think that's what it comes down to. I'm really into the slow and brooding, ponderous stuff. And,
right.
it's to me. I'd rather it takes as long as it takes. But a short scenario, I would say could take 1 to 2 sessions. A medium-sized scenario may take 3 or 4 sessions. A campaign, you're looking at 1 year to 4 years, depending on how slowly. And I'm talking like the mega campaigns, the big ones.
So here's what I want to do. I want to quickly go through combat, and then I want to talk about sanity. And then I kind of want to talk about, like, what does a Call of Cthulhu campaign look like? And I know you gave me an example of a PDF to kind of talk about what does different games kind of look like in that respect. Obviously, there's other chapters in here about how magic works, how car chases or chases of any type work, how to be a good keeper. I'm assuming that they have some really nice, and there's a bestiary. There's even a starting scenario. We are not going to cover those. But I do want to talk about chapter 6, which is combat, and chapter 8 or 9, which is sanity. Because obviously, in my mind, there's 2 things that are going to happen to you in a Call of Cthulhu game. You're going to die, or you're going to go insane, or both. So I do want to understand that. And you mentioned that combat is a little different, and I do kind of want to understand it a little bit. Because not that it's a combat game, but when combat is probably very lethal and very scary, it's worth taking a look at. So combat has its own rules that focus on the action and help determine who is doing what, when it is done, and the degree of success. Rather than having a single roll made to decide the outcome of a fight, a series of rolls are made until there's a clear victor. So a little bit more trad in that respect, right? Basically, not saying initiative combat rounds, but kind of in that concept.
It gets way into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, a little bit nitty. What declaration of intent? What is your character doing? The keeper should ask the player, the characters, and encourage them to describe their investigator's actions rather than using the game terminology. Okay, Bob. He's not watching it. I'm rolling to hit is not something an investigator would ever say or do, right? Whereas, I pull out my revolver and I start blindly shooting, right? Endeavor to paint a picture with your depiction of combat and encourage your players to do likewise. Solid advice for all of us, okay? I'm going to punch the guard and run for the door. The guard is going to try to grab you. Roll your brawling skill. The monstrous humanoid, here's our shotgun. The monstrous humanoid is running straight at you. What are you doing? I raise my shotgun and I blast the thing. All right, give me a shotgun roll. I love it. All right. Notice how the request for a dice roll develops out of what the players are saying. In the first example, the goal is just to get past the guard, and the punch is simply a matter of achieving the goal. Damage is more of a side consequence, but the keeper uses the dice to determine whether the maneuver is accomplished. All right, so the combat round. It can be confusing if everybody's going at the same time, so we use a combat round. It's an elastic unit of time, which gives everyone a chance to act and do something. Basic combat mechanics here. Dexterity and order of attack. The question of who gets to attack first is an important issue. Determine the order of attack by ranking their dex from high to low. So it's static. So just if you have a high dex, you're going first.
That's it. Yep.
Okay. On their turn, they may do the following. They can initiate an attack using fighting or firearms. They can perform the fighting maneuver. They can flee. They can cast a spell or the miscellaneous other, pick a lock or do something like that. Okay. Ooh, note. Some monsters are capable of multiple attacks in one round. Nice. A character may elect to delay acting until another character has acted. If this leads to more than one character wishing to act simultaneously, the one with dex takes priority. Okay. Fist fights. To explain combat rules, we'll start with a simple, old-fashioned one-on-one fist fight. Later, we can add rules for melee weapons, multiple opponents, firearms, and other options. But we'll probably just cover the fist fight to kind of get a sense for what the combat situation is. All right. Melee attacks are resolved using opposed skill rolls. Now, we talked a little bit about this before, but the idea is that when you're in a situation, because it's like, well, what's the DC? It's against my own skill. So how does that work against his skill? Right? So melee attacks are resolved using opposed skill rules. When attacked, a character has a simple choice: dodge or fight back. If they choose to fight back, use the target's fighting skill to oppose the attacker's fighting skill. If the character chooses to dodge, use the target's dodge skill to oppose the attacker's fighting skill. And if they're neither dodging nor fighting, refer to surprise attacks. Now, for an opposed roll, let's say your fight skill is 70 and my fight skill is 50, and I roll under 50 and you roll under 70. Who wins there?
It depends on what action you're doing.
All right. Fighting back.
So fighting back, it's just by success.
Okay. So if I succeed, I do damage to you. If you succeed, you do damage to me.
Yep. So they both clock each other in the head at the same time.
Got it. So it's kind of a simultaneous
Yes.
action. Got it.
Yeah. So if you dodge and you succeed, it doesn't matter what degree of success. If you dodge, you automatically, it doesn't matter if I succeed or not, you win. You are able to dodge out of the way.
But I've given up my opportunity to sort of do damage to you.
So if there are two people fighting against you,
Got it.
You know the second guy's absolutely going to hit you. Now, this is where the game gets really fun, though, because if you have one player fighting two opponents, he might be like, well, what's more beneficial? Knocking out one of them.
Got it.
So to fight one, or dodging so I don't get hit at all, there's a chance the second guy is going to hit me.
Now, I see here in kind of further, not complicating it, but nuances of it. If I do manage to get a hard success or an extreme success, and this is a fighting back situation where we're fighting, then if I get the higher level success, then I deal damage to you and you don't do any damage to me. Is that right?
Yeah.
Because I was just so much better, or I rolled so low. I rolled so low.
Faster.
Oh, and there's a situation. Okay, we could both fail, and then nobody does shit. All right.
Yeah, you can have, and that happens too.
Yeah.
Where everyone just fails, and that's just, you just move on.
Got it. And then we do damage. And I saw on the character sheet, and again, I mean, that's the basic gist of it. And then, like you said, with the dodge, it's just, can you dodge or not? So a character with a really high dodge skill is probably going to be able to, if they wanted to, bob and weave, at least against on a 1v1 situation, fairly well, right?
Yep. The other thing to keep in mind
you cannot push combat rolls, right?
Yes. A fun house rule that I use is I don't roll damage. I have the player roll the damage
for themselves against themselves.
Yeah. So this way they really feel, it's a little more visceral when you're rolling the damage against yourself.
Got a nice little combat flow chart here on page 109.
Yeah, that flow chart is fantastic because it really does show, like, well, if it's a maneuver, how does your build work into it? And that's where the penalty dice come in. For every difference in size between the two,
got it.
You take a penalty die, and they get a bonus die. So if someone is big, like we had last week or 2 weeks ago, the same situation. They got stuck in traffic in London. 3 cars, 7 guys jump out. All of them had a build of 1. All of my guys, all the players, had builds of 0.
They got manhandled.
Yeah.
And again, to your point here, the combat flowchart even really quickly explains it. Outnumbered. Once a character has dodged or fought back in a round, all subsequent attacks on them receive a bonus die. And I talked about statistically how much of a big difference this is. So, being outnumbered is really bad.
Yeah.
In this game. Right?
Also,
wow.
They know, because it's just my tactic, is I always have the bad guys fight back. I only choose fight back.
Yeah, I saw that there was a thing here that says, should the monster, I suppose that could be NPC. There was even a section here. Should the monster does the monster fight back or dodge? The default mode for monsters and NPCs is to fight back rather than dodge.
Yeah. Because they have nothing to lose.
Yeah, right.
It sucks from the player because they know that it's going to hurt no matter what happens. That something's going to give.
Correct. 100%. Now, I saw on the character sheet that there is this idea of, and they got rules in here for guns, and we're not going to get too deep into this.
Close range adds bonuses and all this other.
But I think there's 2 questions I have. One is, what is a major wound, and what does that do?
Okay.
And the second is, what happens when you get to 0 hit points? Because that's the other
bad
question.
Things.
So
it's all bad things.
All right. So I've got major wound pulled up here, and this happens basically when you take half your hit points in one blow.
Yep. Which is very easy.
Sure. Okay.
It's very easy.
And if that happens, you may die if your current hit points are reduced to 0. Okay. So if I don't have a major wound, if I've only been getting nickeled and dimed, then I may not die. But if I get basically a sucking chest wound, then if I go to 0 hit points, I'm in real trouble.
Yeah, and this is where the simulation and like the heavy proceduralism really comes in handy in this game, because it lays out, like, you hit 0, you do this, you do this, you do this. And if you don't have anyone that has first aid,
You're just not going to make it.
bad scene. It's
Yeah.
worse.
So
if you're in that shape and they fail their first aid roll.
Sure.
Okay.
So we take the major wound, we fall prone because it was a crippling wound. We have to make an immediate roll just to avoid passing out. And then if we go to 0 hit points while the major wound box is ticked, we become dying. And they've got the rules here where we have to make a con roll at the end of any rolls. And if any of those rolls fail, we die immediately. So not only there's no countdown, there's no death saves. You fail one and you're out. Wow. Okay. Wow. All right.
And basically, if you get major wound, depending on how many points you're starting with, but if you have a major wound, that's the time where you start thinking about retiring the character, perhaps.
Sure.
Just because
this isn't a spend a night in the hotel and you recover type situation. That's what I'm assuming. Yeah. Got it. Okay. So yeah. So, there's kind of an interesting paragon here though, because, it talks about how, like, if you go to 0 hit points, and you don't have a major wound, I'm not saying it's great, but it's just, you got punched, you're knocked out in the fight. But it really sets that tone of like, no, you got shot with a gun. Like you're going to die. You're going to bleed out. Like,
that's it.
and I like that you can use one track, which is hit points, but it kind of does double duty because that hit point track means something very different when the major wound box is checked versus when it's not checked. And it, as a player, it's kind of another signal of shit has just gotten real, right? Because you feel very different when you have 5 hit points left and you have major wound checked versus when you have 5 hit points left and you don't have it checked, right? It's a much more, you're like, okay, I'm really paying attention now. It's also brutal after hearing all this stuff that you can't push rolls in combat. Like after everything that we talked about, it's like when you get into combat, it's like, no, there's no time. Like everything is it's that old school sentimentality. You don't literally die at 0 hit points here. But one of the things that I always talk about with first edition AD&D and BX D&D, which I've played a lot more BX D&D over the years now than I have first edition AD&D, even though that was my first game, is you look at it on the surface and you say, well, this seems really boring. There's no feats, there's no awesome cool powers. I attack, you attack. Yeah, but the what is riding on any single one of those die roll, when your character has 4 hit points or 8 hit points and the monsters are rolling D6, a critical hit could kill your character at level 3 or 4. And, there's a gradual reduction of those hit points. So yeah, sure. You feel pretty confident that first fight of the day, but once you took that one first hit, there's something that's like very, very visceral about having like, the 3 HP, 3 HP AC2 creature, or player, I've got, plate and a shield or something, AC1 or AC2, whatever that is. And being like, I am almost invincible, but if I get hit, I'm just dead. And so even though the game is boring, there's so much riding on every single die roll. It like makes you, stand up and pay attention. So I have for one personally experienced that. And so like, I like the idea that this hit point track can be double duty.
But you also see how the damage bonus, how like even a simple fist fight could.
And that's from strength plus size or just strength?
It's size and strength, I think.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So if you're adding a D3 or a D4,
right,
plus your damage on top of it.
I might have missed. How do we calculate hit points? Is it based off of your con? And it's based on your con and size, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I believe so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the whatchamacallit, the character sheet, I mean the max hit points on the sheet is 20. So like it's not really great there. Very cool. All right. Let's talk about sanity, because that's the other thing that you can lose in Call of Cthulhu. And then we'll talk about kind of the range of experiences, and then we'll head out for the night. All right. So sanity is a track, just like wounds that we saw, where your character starts with sanity equal to your character's willpower or power stat we saw. So that's why sanity can go as high as 99. But as you encounter things throughout the course of the game, your character might lose their mind. So, Ben, sanity rolls. Sanity points should be tracked carefully, as the numbers can change up and down throughout the game. So, we talked about before, like you can go get help, right? Each player whose investigator experiences this source of horror rolls a D100 when the keeper calls for a sanity roll. Bonus dice and penalty dice are not applied to sanity rolls, with one exception, which is self-help. Note, if you're using, and we mentioned this before, but I think it bears in mind, you cannot spend luck on sanity rolls. So you're like on your own, basically. A successful roll means you lose no sanity or only a minimal amount. Oh, brutal. So that is like literally a death spiral, because the lower your sanity goes from losing sanity, the more likely you are to fail future sanity rolls.
Yes, and it gets worse.
And it gets worse.
Yeah, it gets way worse.
All right.
The other thing,
please.
I just right off the top is there are situations where the keeper might have a sand loss without a roll.
Got it. You might.
This is too much for your character. Like they're being tortured.
Right. It's not a question of withstanding it. It's just, it's a given.
Yeah.
In a published Call of Cthulhu scenario, sanity loss rolls are shown as two numbers separated by a slash. For example, SAN 1 / 1d4 + 1. The number to the left is if you succeed. The number to the right is if you fail. Sometimes this might be SAN 0 / 1d4. It makes sense. Okay. Failing a sanity roll always causes the investigator to lose self-control. So even if you're fine, you're still not fine. Got it. You might jump out in fright. And this is like a moment of losing player agency in a sense, right? Like the GM kind of, or the keeper kind of, takes over for a second. You jump, you cry out, you swerve the wheel and crash the car because you saw something out of the corner of your eye that you couldn't comprehend. And again, I'm smiling because I love that there's nothing more horrifying, especially in an RPG, than losing control of your character, even for a brief moment. And it's like this, you're like, oh, I lost sanity? Cool. I'll just write it down. Like it's another hit point loss and you're just tracking it. Like it's no big deal. But the fact that there's this in-game reaction that the keeper gets to sort of narrate, I think makes that 10 times worse. Very cool. Insanity. Okay. So regardless of whether so you have temporary and indefinite insanity.
Yes, this is where the rubber hits the road.
Okay.
This is like the whole game kind of hinges around what the cause of the trauma.
Got it.
And is it a persistent trauma or is it a temporary trauma?
Got it. So the insanity begins with a brief bout of madness during which a character's ability to control their investigator is compromised. The bout of madness is followed by a period of underlying insanity in which they maintain full control of their investigator, but they become prone to delusions, phobias, and further bouts of madness. And the third phase is recovery, trying to recover from this insanity. Now, in this way, the insanity can either be temporary, indefinite, or permanent. So if you lose 5 or more sanity points from a single sanity loss, sufficient. Okay, so that's like if the damage threshold to your sanity is 5 or more in any one loss.
It's a D8 sand loss.
Got
it.
You
fail.
Right.
You roll
Perfect. And by the way, another great example of mapping. Here's an example of sanity point cost. 0/D2, finding a mangled animal carcass. 1D10/1D100, seeing Great Cthulhu. And that should put that into perspective pretty nicely here of what we're dealing with. But if you lose 5 or more from a single source of sanity, emotional trauma has brought that the keeper must test the investigator's sanity. The keeper asks for an intelligence roll, and if that roll is failed, oh wow! If the roll is failed, the investigator has repressed the memory, a trick the mind uses to protect itself, and does not become insane. Perversely, if the int roll succeeds, they fully understand the that's so good.
Now you kind of understand why the int is so high too.
Yeah, right. It's what is the blessed is the mind too small for doubt. It's like ignorance truly is bliss in this situation. That is fantastic. All right. On losing a fifth or more of your sanity in a single game day, you become indefinitely insane. No investigator is able to simply shrug this off. This is no temporary bout. Depending on the situation, it may mean surviving until dawn, sitting down for a nice cup of tea, or ending a good night's sleep. That's the end of your day. Indefinite insanity lasts until you are cured or recovered. So that's like if you had a really bad day.
Yeah, rest of their life, basically. It'll pretty much last the rest of the investigator's life.
Permanent insanity is kind of like the soft death, right? Where if it goes to 0, you are permanently incurably insane and you cease to be a PC. Straight up.
That's correct. You become an NPC, and many of those characters end up becoming antagonists.
Of course, absolutely. And so that's kind of like the mental death point right along the line. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these effects of insanity, but I'm assuming that they are mostly, I don't want to say narrative in origin, but it's not like you get a -2 to shoot, right? It's probably more like your behavior. It's kind of like like an understanding between the keeper and the player. Hey, your character, like you said here, violence, right? Like your character has to become violent, and they go on. It doesn't like, I'm not going to like literally control your PC, but like you got to play to that bout of madness. You got to play to that bout of insanity.
And this is where it ties back again, how lethal handguns are. And if you have a bout of insanity and you have a handgun and you start firing it off because you're freaking out.
Right. That's sweet.
Your character is probably going to walk away from it, but
right. Exactly.
Else, he is not.
And again, this is where it brings back to, for this bout of madness, Ben, like you were talking at the beginning, and they mention here the ideology and beliefs, the significant people, the meaningful locations, the treasured possessions. These things all kind of factor into this. And sort of can be a factor of it. And again, so the bout of madness is more of like just a relatively short experience, right? Where you just have
Depends on how you're doing it. You have real time or like an abstract. So if, for example, something happens, you're on a construction site and something jumps out and it scares them and they have a bout of madness. In that case, I would do the abstract one where it's hours instead of rounds.
Got it.
But if it's a combat situation, and they suffer the sand loss because the thing, is clinging to the ceiling and it scuttles down the wall, and they're like, and then I would do it in rounds.
Got it. And that's where they have this real time table. So make it like if the basically if it happens in combat, more or less, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then now phase 2 is where you have this sort of underlying insanity that lasts after the bout of madness.
Yeah.
And this is where we get into like this fantastically long list of phobias and various manias. And like, do you find that you roll this randomly, or do you kind of tailor these phobias to the specific nature of what kind of happened?
It depends. If the character is like, it's a newer character that came in and it nothing really ticks, I might roll twice and pick the more fun one.
Sure.
But if the character has kind of had a recurring theme going on, recurring theme, like we had one character who had, through the course of the game, lost custody of his daughter. So he became, kind of very obsessed over children and his daughter. And when he had a bout of insanity, I said that, he develops a fear of ghosts, but it's not ghosts. He's specifically seeing his daughter.
Got it.
And like at one point, a taxi cab pulls up and his daughter's sitting in the back seat, and he's like, he just can't get into the cab. He's like, just to go, because he thinks like this is my daughter.
Right.
Like it's all delusions. It's all just in his.
So again, it there is an onus on the player to play into that, right? Which I think is important and sort of a definite element of the game. Like if you get amnesia, obviously the player does not develop amnesia, but it is on you to sort of play into that. And again, they're very limited here, but if we do get private care, like, I don't know, perhaps at Arkham, right? I think that's where that's from, right? Yeah. From Arkham Asylum.
Sharon Ton. If you're really unlucky,
After a
Bedlam.
month of psychiatric medication and psychoanalysis, you can recover 1d3 sanity points. So this is a very inefficient, bad, like, yeah, if you're going to go heal up your sanity for a year, all the evil shit is going to come to fruition because you just don't have time for this.
Yeah, but it could also tell a really interesting story. Depending on your group, you might have where you go, it's 6 months later.
Sure.
And now let's follow up on your character and see what happened, because they did want to go for the care. But yeah, it doesn't change the timeline of the bad guys at all. Now it's going to be that much harder.
Yeah.
But it does allow for it. It all depends on the kind of campaign you're running. We run one so slow that if we did that 6 months of convalescence, it would be decades.
All right, Boothby, he needs to head out or be divorced. We'll have to listen to the rest later. Boothby, that's all right. We're going to be wrapping up here in the next couple of minutes. Thank you so much for your incredible support tonight, Boothby. I look forward to taking this game for a spin. I'm enjoying it more than I thought I would, Ben. So, and again, another great example here before we kind of wrap up Insanity is just a great example of these sidebars that sort of map these otherwise vague concepts and numbers to words and nouns and adjectives. What does 3 points of sanity loss look like or feel like? What versus 8 points? We all know what the number means, but what does it mean in the game? How would I describe that differently? It
also works in the inverse when something happens as a keeper.
As a way to translate it into a sanity loss.
Yeah, to be like, okay, this is a wild thing. Roll D2.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay.
And everyone goes, yeah. That's when you know you're working with a great group of players, by the way, is like, even when one of the reasons I love playing games with like Smith is because, we'll be playing like Legend of the Five Rings and he'll be like saying something. He's like, you know what? The fact that I'm even thinking about doing this probably means I lost honor, and he just like writes the, like, yeah, you're probably right. Like that kind of like self-aware reflection, I think is like so critical and important. So yeah. And again, there are rules for magic in this game. There's also a dedicated section to being a good keeper and playing the game and learning how to play the game. And all sorts of weird ancient artifacts of strange and forgotten lore. And of course, spells and beasties and all this other stuff. But we're not going to get into those. But I do want to take a look at this final document, which is something that Ben sent over to me. And this is Cthulhu Through the Ages. Guidelines for playing Cthulhu in 7 different eras, because everything we've been reading has been sort of 1920s, Cthulhu. See, Bub, you gotta get out of here. Your jazz hands are getting into my business. It's really,
yeah.
But
so it's what they call Jazz Age, or the classic game is set in the mid 1920s.
That's when Lovecraft was alive and writing. I mean, I think that's the basic gist of it, right? So this book, and I'm assuming that these things might even have more support in other books and supplements.
Yes.
We have Cthulhu Invictus, which I'm going to guess means Roman era.
Yes.
Okay, sweet. Cthulhu Dark Ages, so your kind of classic medieval horror. Druidic, Celtic. Mythic Iceland, so sort of Scandinavian Viking horror. Swords and Arrows, I'm going to guess is more like high Middle Ages, sort of early Renaissance. Very, Charlemagne and Holy Roman Empire type era. Cthulhu by Gaslight is like Victorian?
1890s, yeah.
Yeah. Dreamlands, no clue.
That was the aforementioned question about Dreamlands.
Which
is Dreamlands is it gets really complex, but it's basically a parallel universe to what's called the waking world that inhabits every dream by every sentient creature in the universe. So each person has their own dreamlands as well, collective dreamlands.
So it's kind of like Teleran Rioid from Wheel of Time.
Yes, but scarier. But
right.
Yes.
I mean, Teleran wasn't necessarily supposed to be not scary, but yeah, but obviously probably scarier than it is in Wheel of Time. Interesting. So does that make for like a more, I don't want to call it whimsical, but I feel like it's more like an Alfonso Cuarón film, right? Like Pan's Labyrinth. It's like maybe like really weird.
It can. It all depends on what part of the dreamlands they're in.
Interesting.
Yeah, it could be just like a fever dream. The thing that's great about the dreamlands in particular is when you wake up from your dream, you have to make I think it's an int roll. And if you pass your intelligence roll, you remember or is it inverted? I think it's like a sand roll where you have to fail it to remember the dream.
Got it. It's trapped in its own world.
So you can have lots of stuff happening in the dreams and their characters unaware of what's going on. They might wake up and they're like, why am I so tired? You're like, you're super fatigued and you're taking penalty rolls during the day. You're like, oh, you're going to doctors. You're like, I can't sleep. But because your character can never remember.
Got it.
Anyway, eventually they might succeed.
Sure.
And then all the memories come flooding back. And that's when you can have bouts of insanity stuff.
$20 tip from Donnie, who says, shout out to my future Mithras bros. Buds.
Nice.
Yeah, we're definitely going to be doing that. Looking forward to doing that. That's another first look that we're going to be doing too. Then we have Cthulhu Icarus. Donnie, hopefully, we can start a little earlier. Although that is for you, I think you're in Central Time, so that's Henry says is with the super chat is it like the dreaming in Neil Gaiman's The Sandman?
Yes, he definitely was very inspired by a very specific Lovecraft story. But yes,
got it.
It's similar from it.
So, but it was something that he.
Well, the thing was when Lovecraft wrote about the Dreamlands, he wrote 3 stories this cycle.
Okay.
In that cycle, he was basically lucid dreaming. So they need like wacky stories that make very little sense. But it's all dream logic essentially, and all of that's ported in game. So
Sweet.
You could pretty much, I mean, you get a dreaming skill that's equal to your power, where you can create things in the Dreamlands.
I'm scrolling through Cthulhu Icarus now, and it's just funny to see like pulse rifle beams in Cthulhu.
Yeah. So Icarus is basically like Event Horizon.
Event Horizon, right? Which is a movie. Actually, I know people hate it, but I think that movie's actually pretty good. I love it. I actually do love it. I love Sam Neill and I love Lawrence Fishburne. That is part of it. But I do think it's a really great film. I know people, I don't think it's really well reviewed. And then lastly, we have Cthulhu End Times.
Yes, one of my favorite settings.
Okay. So this is what, like the very end of the world?
Yeah, you might have something where, let's say you have the villains are on an agenda and the investigators have X amount of years or months to stop them. And if they don't, something bad's going to happen. You might have them have a vision of the future.
Got it.
What if they fail? You could just catapult them in and use End Times. There's a great book. There's a great book of Grain called Apocalypse that has a lot of more to say on the idea too of what happens when the cultists finally win.
I like that they have different character sheets for the different
eras.
Yeah.
And since that came out, Regency just came out as another time setting. So the thing that's funny about it is all of the historical settings are very well researched.
Okay.
So it's
not just pasted on. It's not like Cthulhu Invictus literally feels like historical, but also very different.
It's augury. You're using period-specific weapons. The way things work is very much in keeping with the times. Very simulationist. So
very simulationist. So, and of course, there's Pulp Cthulhu, and which is here at the end of your little brochure. And I think people have been saying, Boothby's been talking about it in the game, in the chat a couple times. He said that in like Pulp Cthulhu, you get like you have twice as many hit points. It's basically giving your characters more of a fighting chance, right? Essentially, allowing them to be, more of a D&D kind of style Call of Cthulhu experience.
It's two-fisted investigators, kicking butt, taking names, and then there's this backdrop of tentacled horror.
Like, would you argue that like Indiana Jones Temple of Doom is a Pulp Cthulhu adventure? people ripping out people's hearts or something,
Yeah, that's still a little too pulpy.
Too pulpy. Okay.
Yeah,
So it's not that much pulp. Got it.
It's
Henry,
pretty cool.
So Henry wants to know what setting I would be most interested in playing. I'm curious, Ben, what is your favorite setting to play? I actually know the answer to this. For me, not for you.
I would say for me, it's a tie.
Okay.
Between Gaslight and Classic.
Got it. Right. Classic's not in here because that's the default.
Yeah.
So my answer to this is kind of a cheat. So my answer would be, if it's in what's in the book, I actually think personally that Gaslight would also be my favorite. I think that there is something innately, I like that it's before the advent of most modern appliances. It's very Jack the Ripper. It's very, it's a time when technology and science and mysticism were all sort of one and the same. And I'm a big fan of that time period. I love like the movie The Prestige is like one of my favorite movies. And I love that era, that like pre-turn of the century kind of era. But it's not listed here. But the other thing, sorry, Ben, what were you saying?
It's its own dedicated source book, just like Cthulhu Modern has its own dedicated source book. And as they go through these periods, they get their own dedicated source books.
Got it. But my cop-out answer is because the closest we ever came to playing Call of Cthulhu was in the late 90s when they released Delta Green, which was sort of a variant of Call of Cthulhu, because I grew up loving the X-Files. I love, sort of, alphabet, government alphabet, conspiracy type stuff. And like, aliens and secret cults and Mulder and Scully, that whole jazz. And I understand that like Delta Green has kind of gone on its own separate path, and some places shitty, some places okay. But that kind of era, that sort of modern era of the sort of paranormal investigation by the government agency, is very, very appealing to me, on its kind of its own basis. In fact, there was a D20 Modern supplement called, oh God, if someone in chat can even know this, it was called.
Thinking of the Laundry?
No. It was Dark Matter is what it was called, and it was for the
Dark Matter.
Yeah, it was called for the D20 Modern, and I thought that was. I remember I bought those books. We never even played D20 Modern, but I bought these Dark Matter books because I thought they sounded so cool, because it felt like a Delta Green that we never got to the table. But again, I grew up loving the X-Files. But like Derik of today would probably go with the Gaslight. I agree with you, Ben. I think that's a really cool era, and I think it'd be really fun. So that will be our first look at Cthulhu. So a couple things I'm going to do here before we end. So number one is, Ben, I know you don't like it, but would you agree with my assessment that Cthulhu is a very low game score? It's not trying to be a good game. It doesn't really seem to care about that. There's no rules for fairness or balance, and it's more about like making your character as realistic and reflective of what's going on in the past. The game element of it is minimal. There's no, even the language of the game isn't set up to be like, and you're trying to win, you're trying to beat it, you're trying to maximize it. I understand that people could probably play it that way, but as you pointed out, they are failing, right? They're missing it. They're missing the whole point of the experience. So I would say it's a very low game score. I was surprised that there was more narrative elements in here than I thought there was. Luck pushing, the sort of the ability for a player to kind of describe what success and failure looks like, and working with the keeper a little bit to sort of do that. Especially luck. It's a very powerful tool. Now, I'm not saying it's like a game that's trying to like enforce, hey, if you act a certain way, I'm going to give you this meta currency. Not like that. But it is higher than I thought it was. I thought the game was just pure, strict simulation. But I do think it's like, I got probably a couple points there of narrative. More, I would say more than like first edition D&D does, for sure. Right. And then simulation is through the roof.
Yeah.
This game is very obsessed with trying to make it feel like it is this thing. So, I'm excited. I think we're going to do this one shot. Thank you for the tip goal being reached. We're going to get more first looks. Thank you for the super chat goal being reached. But, I think I kind of talked myself the mechanics of the game are compelling enough that I think the problem is with horror in a game is if you're thinking about it in a D20 situation, it feels bad because the mechanics of the game aren't what are pushing you into that interesting thing. They feel counter-purposed, which is why, and I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad, if you're playing horror in D20, you're not doing it right because the mechanics of D20 aren't set up to either encourage, reward, or support this kind of behavior. So when I see a game that delivers on its premise, even if I don't necessarily love that premise, it still becomes much more interesting to me. So yeah, I mean, tentatively, I think it's pretty cool, and I think it's really interesting. I mean, again, you have to be in the right mindset and you have to do the right thing. I can tell you straight up right now, I would not play a 4-year-long Horror on the Orient Express, whatever campaign. And I'm not necessarily, but I also don't like one-shots. So I would much rather focus on, maybe a month in the city, and maybe a dozen or so investigators that come and go over the course of that month. Oh, they died and their brother steps in to find out. Cause now the mystery is, oh, how did my brother die? And he joins the investigation because his brother's dead. And so kind of like a very John Carter way. What was that?
I'm sorry.
No, please.
With one-shots is that I find them to be very one-note in that
Sure.
they all have the same arc, essentially, because people play it just to get a taste for the system, and they want to go insane or die at the end of the session, which, in reality, like in our game, even though there is a high mortality rate, it still takes 3 or 4 sessions before that happens.
Right. And I agree with you. I think sometimes with one-shots, people oversell it because you kind of want to get that full experience. And I don't hate that, to be clear. But I generally speaking would much rather do this as something like something in that sub 6 to 12 session range, because I feel like that would give you enough time to probably gain and maybe lose some investigators, or still have a realistic chance of like, yeah, my guy made it through the whole thing to the end only to die, at the last minute, or to pull out success. And of course, in classic style, like, they win, but you realize it's only a temporary, you all you have done is abated the flood, right? You haven't stopped the tide. And I mean, that's just a classic horror trope, right, of all time. But yeah, I mean, it's fun. I enjoy certain elements of horror games. Again, I've run Dread many times and I've really, really enjoyed it. But I think delving into sort of some of the player moments, I think is what makes this more interesting to me. Because it kind of gets down to a little bit of a mouse guard thing, Ben. Like, what do you care about? What are you willing to risk to push this role? Like, what are you willing to sacrifice to achieve your goals? That's not a horror thing. Yeah. That's a human thing, right? That's a personality. And that is way more interesting to me than, it was scary and he died and my brain exploded. Like, that is a little boring. But knowing that, what your character would be willing to do and what they wouldn't be willing to do in order to find the truth or stop this from ever happening again, that is much more compelling to me.
Yeah, what lengths are they willing to go through to achieve their goal, and what are they willing to sacrifice? Because it's all up for grabs.
Right.
Everything they value is up for grabs.
And the game definitely does not mince words on the stakes, right? Like you're talking about, the lives of potentially every man, woman, and child in the entire planet, right? So I think it's pretty cool. So thank you, Ben, for walking me through this. I thought you did an excellent job of sort of providing context and providing the details. You obviously know this very well. And thank you so much to chat for your incredible support. The tip goals both reached. I'm kind of excited. And again, I bought the books, so I'm getting ready to play. It's a beautiful book, by the way.
Yeah, it's nice.
Two ribbons.
Yeah,
that's the minimum. You need at least 2. 3 is better, but 2 is nice. So I definitely recommend checking that out. If you're interested in picking up the game, the link in our description below will take you over to Drive-Thru-RPG. We get a couple percentage points off of that if you do end up buying it. It is an expensive PDF though, so I would recommend that if you're going to buy it, as Ben was saying, buy it from Chaosium, because if you buy the hardback, you get the PDF. So why buy it twice? And that's definitely the way to go for that. Plus, it's nice to have the book, everybody. And now I feel a little bit more respectful as an RPGer because I've actually read Call of Cthulhu. Oh, one last question. We didn't get... Okay, I don't know what Call of Cthulhu. I've seen merch for it forever, for years, games. What the hell is this?
So that is called the Elder Sign.
Okay.
It's in two forms. That's one form. The other one has like a leaf design. And it is a catch-all symbol that's used in Lovecraft stories. He never explains what it does.
Well, there you go.
It's just tied with the mythos. It's kind of like the King in Yellow has a certain symbology associated with it. Saying when you see that symbol, it means the Elder Sign. In the game, you can have someone learn the Elder Sign, and in the rules it says, what does it do? What do you want it to do? The keeper just decides what they think.
So it's sort of a catch-all symbol of power, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you, Lily Candy. Thanks for hanging out with us. Ken, thank you so much. Appreciate you. Sigma Y says, thanks, Ben. Love Fist says, yay, Ben. Cheers, Ben. Thank you for doing this. Vin, I think you're absolutely right. All those character elements come back to pushing roles. Why are you pushing this? Because I'm doing it for my daughter. Because I don't want my school to get destroyed by this dark evil that is erupting from the library, or whatever like that. I'm thinking of my students. Like, it's a great way to sort of make those narrative elements mean something in the context of the game. So I think that's really, really great. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Ben. And we'll see you next time. We're going to be finishing up Root next week. We've got more first looks to go. Ben's going to be back at some point in the future, along with Donnie, to do. And you may remember Donnie from our Poppet Christmas Carol adventure, because we're going to be talking about Mythros, which is another game system that, quite frankly, when Donnie got excited about a game, that is enough for me to get excited about the game. So looking forward to getting together with those fine gentlemen. So if you're interested in this kind of conversations, if you want to learn more, if you want to talk to these people directly, join the Patreon, patreon.com/NiceLessCall. That's where all the real deep conversations are going. Ben alone has written over a dozen system deep dives at this point, Ben, where he literally goes through and breaks down every single element about a game, what he likes, what he doesn't like, how the game operates. He's basically doing what I'm doing. He's just doing it in text format, so easier for, maybe to consume at your leisure. That's all part of our Patreon benefits. And, we just have an incredible community that is really, really interested in gaming. We like Pathfinder 2. I'm, cautiously not too thrilled about these new classes, but, we'll see where they go. But I also like learning new games, playing classic indie games. And so there's so much more to talk about. Our RPGs is a remarkably diverse hobby, and I think people would behoove themselves to enjoy the wonderful banquet that is offered to them. So thanks again to Ben. Thanks again to all of you. And we'll see you next time on Knights of Last Call. Bye, everybody. Peace.